Ooh. Welcome, everyone, to our first Joint Education Committee of the year. It's good to see so many familiar faces and a few new ones out there. Hope you're all doing well and that you've had a little rain or snow or whatever you needed for your neck of the woods. Today, after we take roll, we're going to go ahead and I forgot to tell Tanya this. We're going to actually give a little time to our state superintendent. So I should have hollered at you before. You can stay put if you'd like. Okay.
Nope.
Nope, not gonna do it. Okay.
No.
She does not want to, she doesn't want to, okay, create any problems. So my bad. So anyway, we always have to talk a little bit about decorum, and I never read the script. I don't know. Do you ever read the script? I just say, let's be nice, let's be respectful. And we never have an issue, obviously in education. So that's my reading of the script. Let's go ahead and I would ask for a motion on the minutes.
Take roll first.
Yep. Let's take roll first. Then I'll ask for a motion.
Madam Chairman, for the Joint Education Committee meeting on June 1st, 2026, Senator Brennan.
Here.
Senator Olson.
Here.
Senator Rothfuss.
Here.
Senator Scott.
Here.
Representative Bratton. Representative Erickson. Representative Guggenmoss. Representative Kelly.
Here.
Representative Lawley.
Excused?
Representative Singh.
Excused?
Representative Strock.
Excused?
Representative Williams.
Here.
Co-Chairman Andrew.
Here.
Chairwoman Schuler.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. I know that a few of them are out of town. Some of the rest of us may have been there as well, but we had more important things to do here in Casper. So that's why we're here. We'll go ahead now and I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Anyone?
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved. Okay, a second. All those in favor of the minutes, approval of the minutes, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the minutes have been approved. Now we can get on to the first few minutes. State Superintendent Degenfelder asked for a few minutes beginning of the session today, not the session, but the committee meeting to just give us some updates on what's going on in WDE. So I'm going to turn the time over to her and welcome and glad to hear from you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing just a bit of time this morning just to address you all. I know that you have a very busy schedule and many of the WD staff will be presenting on topics today. But I did just want to provide, and again, for the record, Megan Degenfelder, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, wanted to just provide a few updates that aren't covered in the agenda today that you might be curious about. A lot of moving parts after the conclusion of the legislative session. We'll start first on standards. I know today you're going to be talking a lot about the basket of goods. Of course, how we implement that basket of goods is through the state content and performance standards. And since I took office, we've had a very heavy lift of trying to work to prioritize standards and reduce standards and testing time. And that has been in partnership with the State Board of Education. And so during the last 3.5 years, we have streamlined 7 content areas. And again, this has been a huge lift and I want to thank my standards and assessment team. We have so far reduced standards by 795 with an estimated 250 more to come in the next 3. And so that's an estimated 60% reduction in standards. And again, this isn't watering down standards. This is prioritizing standards, really focusing on the ones that are most important for us and that will be assessed. We are currently in process with ELA standards review process, as well as career and technical education and social studies. Social studies, you'll be pleased to know there's been a lot of discussion around financial literacy and how that is incorporated in social studies, but those 3 are in process currently. So speaking of the assessment, the plan with this was or the hope was that we would reduce testing time as well. And that was part of my assessment reduction plan that I released, probably over a year now. And so this obviously is delayed where we see how does this actually impact testing time. But this year we do know, for example, that math reduced time in grades 3 through 8, a range of 20 to 39 minutes. That testing time was reduced. So pretty significant there. One thing to note about YTOP, if you've heard from teachers, we do have delayed results this year because of the standards review process. And so for math and science, that is delayed. They typically receive that data before the school year ends and can be able to use that. Unfortunately, because of standard setting and cut scores that need to be determined this summer, they will not receive scores until the fall. So just wanted you to be aware of that. Couple of other items I just wanted to quickly mention. Literacy is a big one that I'm sure you're hearing a lot about. In consultation with the Attorney General's office, we have to have rules in place by the July deadline. I have extended that as far as humanly possible. And so we right now are taking public comment on the emergency rules. We have our stakeholder cabinet that's going to be meeting tomorrow. And so to just make that July deadline with emergency rules, and then we'll begin regular promulgation of the rules at the same time on literacy. We did determine that we're able to do that in a phased-in approach. That was a big worry for districts, particularly at the high school level. And so you'll see that in the draft rules. Career and technical student organizations, just wanted this group and legislature as a whole to be aware. We've been working through how we have a really stable mechanism to fund our career and technical student organizations. You'll recall that we doubled that funding. They hadn't had an increase since the year 2000. What we have in place, however, is with the flatline appropriation, there isn't a lot of wiggle room for new CTSOs to enter the scene. And so we have a couple of those around hospitality and tourism as well as healthcare. And so that might be coming to you in the future of how we ensure that those new ones meet a high bar, but also are able to receive funding. Let's see, the education savings account. You may have all seen that the Supreme Court lifted the injunction. And so we are able to begin payments to our ESA families. We are able to roll over Q4 because the decision was made during the last quarter of the school year. And so that will roll over into their accounts, that quarter of the amount. And we will begin that process for this upcoming school year. Now, of course, important to note that the underlying case is still being litigated, and we'll see how that comes out. But in the meantime, we can make payments to parents. Let's see, we also launched the Patriot School program. Wanted you all to be aware. That's a designation that will begin this fall. That schools who are doing great work around civics education can be recognized and then hopefully incentivize other schools to participate as well. And a lot of work going on with the upcoming 250th birthday of America. Chairman Schuler has been involved in those efforts on education as well. And I did want to just let this group know, if you haven't spoken to your colleague, Representative Washit, his granddaughter was one of 20 selected as a finalist for the 1776 presidential competition. And so that's across the country, one of 20. And I believe this month she will compete for the final spot. Parent Summit, we recently started the first annual Parent Summit. It was done virtually and had dozens of attendees with that. We went through everything from standards and assessment to how you interact with school boards and participate. And so we hope that that will continue to grow and engage with our parent community. We also began the Tour of Excellence this year. I've been doing that for a couple of years, highlighting schools around the state. We selected 6 schools around patriotism and career and technical education. And then last, but certainly not least, is recalibration, of course. And so that has been a heavy lift that we're working through with the Attorney General's office, with LSO, with our school foundation program team, and with our school districts. Of course, this again is a drastic change, and we understand the timelines have been difficult for our school districts, particularly with their budgeting into the next year. And so we've been working as hard as we can to get information about how that is implemented. So we will come to the recalibration committee with some recommendations on potential fixes, particularly you may have heard around activities funding. And so look forward to that with the recalibration committee. So Madam Chairman, I covered a lot there, but want to make sure to respect your time, knowing that you have a large agenda today. So would stand for any questions.
Thank you for the input. Questions, Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. You'd mentioned concentrating and prioritizing standards along with condensing the tests to make them more streamlined. What challenges do you expect with year-to-year comparison of results once we adjust the standards and the testing so we're not comparing apples to oranges?
I might, Madam Chairman, bring up Lori Hernandez.
Oh, Fran, do you?
Studied this quite extensively.
Sure. Please introduce yourself. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Lori Hernandez, Director of Standards and Assessment at the Department of Ed. So we had a few things that were changing this year, a change in blueprint. We have an upcoming change in vendor next year. So whenever we have those changes, that does cause some reevaluation of the measurement scale and where things fall. And then when things are done, we can do some linking studies and try to put some concordance tables together to see how that compares from year to year.
Anyone else on the committee? Go ahead, good senator. Good to see you, by the way. You slipped
Yeah,
in.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Education savings accounts. Question, how does that mesh with the similar savings account system that was enacted by the Congress in the big beautiful bill? And how does that mesh at the Wyoming level?
Superintendent?
Madam Chairman, Senator Scott, I believe that you're referring to the tax credit program within so Wyoming has opted into the program, and we have communicated with the governor's office that the Department of Education is able to administer that. I believe they're finalizing rules at the federal level as we speak. And so then we'll have more idea of how that fits into play, but we have opted in and plan to participate.
Other questions? Okay, thank you for the updates. Appreciate it. All right, with that, we'll get back on schedule and bring up our whiz, Ms. Hightrack, who has knowledge of everything and anything, right? And sorry, I didn't get you a heads up, but because you were looking so comfortable there. Yeah. Oh, and you've got some help. Okay. Good morning. How are you guys today? Good. Tell us everything you want us to know about the educational basket of goods.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Tanya Heitrick, I'm the Operations Administrator for Legislative Service Office. I'm also the staff attorney for the various education committees. This memo in your meeting packets, it's titled, the subject is K-12 Public Education Baskets of Goods and Services. It addresses your number one interim topic priority, which is the basket of goods and services. You requested that LSO provide a high-level summary of the basket of goods and sort of how we came to be where we're at and what the components are and what the mechanisms that exist to ensure that those content and performance standards and the common core of knowledge and skills is delivered in the classroom. And this is an outgrowth of the 1995 Campbell case. In the 1995 Campbell case, the court said, you must define what a proper education is. And in response to that, the legislature enacted the Common Core of Knowledge and Skills. And there's a laundry list of items within that, subjects that you probably are familiar with, math, science, reading, writing, those types of things. But in addition to that, there's critical thinking. There are other soft skills, and I'll list those as well. But at a larger, higher level, the basket of goods is not just the list of subjects. It's a very interrelated sort of, if you think of it as a watch, each gear is turning in tandem for the state educational program to be delivered across the state to ensure that every student, regardless of location, receives an adequate and equitable education. And so sort of the first building block, if you're thinking about it as sort of a house, the foundation is the common core of knowledge and skills. And those are listed on the bottom of the page 1 of the memo and then on to page 2. But it consists of reading and language arts, mathematics, science, social studies, fine and performing arts, physical education, health and safety, humanities, career and technical education, world cultures and language, computer science, and government civics. And then the common core of skills, these are sort of the soft skills that I was talking about earlier, include problem solving, interpersonal communication, computational thinking, and computer applications, creativity, and life skills, including personal finance management skills. And they've changed relatively minimally since their enactment in 1995. There were a couple of tweaks out of the 2017 recalibration. Applied technology and keyboarding was eliminated, and computer science and computational thinking was added as a result. There's also a requirement that those that the students that are disabled or gifted and talented are addressed in the delivery of education, ensuring that all students receive an adequate education for their particular skill level. In addition, there's a provision in there which is not necessarily related to the topics of the study, but that all schools must endeavor to have class sizes of not more than 1 to 16 through grades 3. And then moving on, sort of to the nuances within those subjects in first grade through 8th grade, the statute requires that schools focus on reading, writing, and math. There's also a requirement related to civics, which is the Wyoming and United States Constitution. There's a pretty rigorous requirement associated with that. I think members have probably heard a time or two about those requirements. But those are required in a minimum of 3 years in grades K through 8, and then 1 year in the secondary or post-secondary. In addition, students have to take an exam prior to graduation and pass that successfully for their diploma. And then those standards, sort of the list of standards that I identified, are further fleshed out by, and the state superintendent spoke to this, the content and performance standards. And those are rules that are enacted by the State Board of Education that identify benchmarks, performance benchmarks by grade, by subject. And as the state superintendent said, they've been engaged in an effort to reduce those substantially and streamline them in response to, I think, public and school district comments. Those standards are required to be reviewed once every 9 years. And in response to that, the state board is required to report back to this committee on any findings with regard to that. And I'll pause here for any questions so far.
Questions for Mr. Heitrick? Ms. Heitrick? Senator Scott?
My question is a general one, and if you believe, as I do, that a key to almost all the rest of education is the ability to read adequately at by the time a child is in 3rd grade, which are the standards and which of the accountability measures that goes with those would be the best ones for me to look at?
Madam
Heitrick?
Chair, Senator Scott, I would defer to the Department of Education on the specific standards. I have a general understanding of what's contained in those, but I certainly am not an expert on which standards are required at what point and how that's demonstrated. Moving on, those content and performance standards, the graduation standards dovetail into those. Those are also established by the State Board of Education, and those are identified in student achievement as measured by coursework or competency-based equivalency examinations. And in the statute, there are minimum requirements to graduate, and that consists of 3 years of math, science, and social studies, and 4 years of English. And then sort of in tandem with that, you have the graduation standards, and then next you have the high school diploma and the certificate of completion. And those also, in consultation with the local school districts, are enacted by the State Board of Education. Moving on to additional measures that ensure that the basket of goods is delivered. That's an important piece from the Campbell cases. Just because you might have a list in statute doesn't necessarily mean that the student in Lusk has the same opportunity as a student in Laramie. And so there are different mechanisms to ensure that that is accomplished. And part of that is accreditation and evaluation. The state board ensures that school districts deliver the program in accordance with the statutes and the rules. And in the event that through that process, they find that a school district is failing to do that, they can take administrative action in consultation with the state superintendent to change that to a lesser than fully accredited, along with some sort of performance plan to to ensure that they meet those needs. The statewide assessment system is sort of the next leg of this chair. And it's designed to measure individual student achievement, school district performance, and statewide educational outcomes. And students are assessed in English, language arts, and mathematics in grades 3 through 10, and science in 4, 8, and 10. And to your point, Senator, it emphasizes accountability of school improvement, valid year-to-year performance tracking, accommodations for diverse student populations, and timely reporting of educational strategies and intervention efforts. One important piece that we've heard over my 20 years of service in education is that assessments take too long of the educational time. And so it takes time away from instruction in the classroom. And so as a result, the legislature enacted a 1% cap. And so the statewide assessment cannot take more than 1% of the total pupil-teacher contact time. And then lastly, the Wyoming Accountability and Education Act, it was added later, trying to think maybe 2014, 2015. Matt will correct me if I'm wrong. But it was enacted later. We both served on that committee, staffing it. And it acts as sort of a comprehensive, overarching accountability framework for all of the components that we just discussed. It has a series of mechanisms to measure and monitor and report school performance through different growth and performance indicators. It includes student performance on the assessment, college and career readiness, graduation rates, 9th grade credit accumulation. And each school receives a performance rating based on those various indicators. There's also included within that, importantly, a statewide system of support. So in the event a school district isn't progressing or a school isn't progressing as anticipated, or they're, falling a little bit behind, there's a mechanism for those students, those schools that are partially meeting or not meeting expectations. And so in conclusion, I think the important takeaway is, one, yes, there's a list of subjects and the content and performance standards and the measures, but I think importantly, it's to recognize that it's an entire system. It's interrelated, like I said, much like a watch. And if you change one gear, sort of the next gears are going to have to be tweaked to accommodate that. So if you make a change to the content and performance standards or the Common Core, that will in turn impact your graduation rates, graduation standards, the assessment, and other items that I listed today. So subject to your questions, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
Questions for Mrs. Heitrich? Yes, Senator Scott.
A question. Now, this year's YTOP results are delayed and won't be available till the fall. But in past years, we've had significant numbers of school districts that are showing results particularly in the English language arts, but you see the same thing in mathematics, where a majority of the students do not achieve proficient or advanced status. What legally can we do about such school districts? Can we withhold any funds from them for not achieving? What penalties can the State Department or the legislature, but primarily I suppose State Department, give to a school district that does not perform well? What do you do about it?
Ms. Heitrich?
Madam Chair, Senator Scott, there are a couple of options. It's not directly correlated to just student performance, but as I mentioned, the Wyoming Accountability and Education Act has a variety of measures that computes rating, and based on your rating, that determines what type of system of supports the Department of Education can offer to those schools to improve their performance. But it's not just that one isolated data point. I think that's important to note. And then secondly, they can look at the accreditation status. If they feel like, if the department and the state board determine that it's a result of the standards not being delivered, there's a rigorous process that they go to in accrediting districts, and they can assist districts through that measure as well. There's no mechanism to withhold funds from school districts for student performance. As you know, education is a fundamental right in the state, and it's not tied to student performance.
Follow up?
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
you say there is a mechanism in connection with the accreditation, that sort of thing. Has it ever been used?
Madam Chair, Senator Scott, I do know that they have modified accreditation status of school districts. I'm not aware of any school districts currently, but I do know in my tenure staffing education committee that there have been a couple of school districts that have been partially meeting. And the department worked with those school districts to raise their accreditation status to ensure that the basket was being delivered. The Department of Education, I'm sure, sorry, Madam Chairwoman, the Department of Education, I'm sure, can speak to the specifics of those school districts. I'm just relying on my memory.
Other questions for Ms. Heitrick? I have a couple. First of all, just the, when I read through the memo, in my own mind, I don't remember when they did this or why they did this, but the requirement for foreign language for K through 2, do you have any idea when that came into play and why we have that? As I was talking to some other folks, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, other than I understand they grasp those topics easier when they're younger. But then if there's not any requirements to further that until high school, it just seems like it's almost lost, in the process. So I wondered, first of all, when that came into play and why we felt the urge to require that for our K through 2, especially since some of them are still kind of catching on to the English language, but that's just my thought.
Madam Chairwoman, unfortunately, I don't know the date that was enacted. I was looking in the notes and the history of the statute to try to find it, but I can certainly locate that. As far as the impetus for it and why the legislature chose that policy determination, I can't speak to that.
Okay. Yes, Senator Scott may have an answer. Go ahead.
I can't give you facts today, but when Representative Hageman was chairman of the House Education Committee, he got it enacted, and the reason was that the research showed then, and still shows, Madam Chairman, that the best time to teach a foreign language is in the very early grades before the child reaches the age of 8 or so, because at that point, the human mind does a better job of learning a language. And he persuaded the rest of us that the way to start was to start early. And this is as a result of that, it has not been effectively implemented, and its implementation has been resisted by the education establishment. But it's there because the research shows that that's the best time to teach a foreign language. And with the exception of a few of the immersion programs, I know this district has several, that push has not been honored, but it would improve the teaching, I think, of both the foreign language and of ability to use our own language if we paid more attention to it, Madam Chairman. So there's a good scientific basis for it, but we've not succeeded in implementing it, other than some of the whole language immersion programs, which I can speak only for this district, have been quite successful.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Who needs Google when we have Senator Scott over here with all that knowledge?
Madam Chair, I
yes.
can speak to the first question. And in 2004, the legislature enacted a pilot program for the foreign language piece. And then it was embedded within the Common Core of skills, or sorry, knowledge.
Okay. And the second question I had is, we haven't had any really substantive revisions other than the 2017, the computer science. And the reason I just wonder if the reason is that we're only reviewing these every 9 years. And I wondered what the magic number is there, why we only do it every 9 years. Any idea on that?
Madam Chair, I can't speak to that either. Don't have a lot of answers today. Perhaps Senator Scott knows the answer to this question as well. But yeah, I don't know. I do know there's discussion about doing it not all at the same time. And so they wanted to adequately, there's a notion that it provides adequate time to review each of these subject matters. And so you're not looking at all content areas at the same time, bringing those recommendations forward. And so there's a schedule that kind of in tandem moves them forward. Perhaps there was consideration with a number of those standards versus the year. And it also allows, when you change a standard, it's not just as simple as, eliminating the 50%. You have to look at the assessment. Secondly, the department spoke to those types of nuances, but I'm not sure the 9 years, why that's a magic number.
Well, I do think we have the State Board of Education coming up later in WD, so maybe they'll have some answers on that, but I appreciate you taking a stab at it. Other questions for Ms. Hightrack? Nothing for Ashley either, huh? We should grill her a little bit while she's here, but okay. Thank you for all your work on this. Thanks so much. I talked with the good co-chair, just kind of a heads up. I'm going to do a better job with heads ups. We're going to wait till the last day to ask for committee directives. We'll still go ahead and do public comment at the end of each of these deals, but we're going to wait until the very last day to do the directives. So just so we have time to mull things over. So good catch here. All right. With that, we'll talk a little bit about implementation, and we'll bring up Mr. Shaner from WDE to talk a little bit about, and you can bring Ms. Hernandez as well. Welcome. Please introduce yourselves for the record, even though we know you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members, Dickie Shaner and Lori Hernandez with the Department of Education. Related to the basket of goods, just to follow up on one of the questions that was just asked, it used to be a 5-year review cycle for state standards. And several years ago, the legislature moved that to every 9 years. It does allow for more time to get through all the different content areas. Plus, there's a 3-year sort of runway. Once those new standards come into play, the districts have 3 years to integrate them fully. So it's a long process, many years to get standards updated and implemented.
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
To tack on one other thing, which I think is important, is the board can choose to expedite a process at any point. So if there is a reason to update, for example, the science standard, it's going to be 4 more years, they have the opportunity to do that on a case-by-case basis, so they can make a motion effectively and do that. But the reasons Ms. Hightrack provided are exactly the reason that we ended up going with the 9 years instead of the 5 years. It was effectively too much work. We wanted them to take more time with it, but we wanted to leave the opportunity for them, if they see some good reason to update one out of cycle, they have that flexibility. So it's basically a minimum of every 9 years. It's a 9-year cycle. And then they develop their own schedule for when that would be to load balance so that they would have an appropriate amount of time to consider it.
And he's our other Google expert, so it's nice to have both of them on the committee. Okay, continue.
Madam Chairman, if I can also add to that, when that discussion was, it used to be every 5 years, and there was a lot of discussion about not only the 3 years to implement, but by the time they implemented it and were being assessed on those new standards, it was time to go through a revision process because that standards review process takes up to 2 years as well. So it just felt like it was constantly moving. So a lot of comment was received from districts about that and the concern about the longitudinal data that wasn't ever going to be present because of the constant shifting. So that was an additional piece to that information.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, a lot of the beginning of our memo is overlaps with Ms. Hightrack's testimony. So I will just jump to some of the reference to federal law because we've been talking about historical context. And one thing that I think is worth noting is in that 1995 timeframe when that basket of goods was adopted in statute, There's very similar language in the federal education law, which we know as the Every Student Succeeds Act now. Back then it had a different name, but the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So I would guess that that was one resource that the legislature looked at when they were creating the basket of goods, was essentially the basket of goods that existed in federal law at that time. And there still is a sort of a federal basket of goods in the ESSA right now, although it's a little bit broader than what we currently have in statute. And then the last thing I would say before I turn it over to Director Hernandez, when we talk about implementing the basket and how are we ensuring that that basket that you have created and that you fund, how do we know it's being implemented? So the first thing is something we've talked about extensively already, and that's the state standards, which are created in collaboration with the State Board of Education, where Lori and her team will get a group of about 40 teachers from around the state who will spend significant time going through every standard in a given content area. So if it's English language arts, we'll get 40 teachers with English language arts expertise to go through those. And then ultimately they go to the state board for approval. And then those standards are what we assess on YTOP. So the test items on YTOP are aligned to those state standards. And then when the kids take YTOP, we can assess how they're doing on all of those state standards that are developed by Wyoming educators. Then there's school accountability. So every single school in this state is given an accountability score. The bulk of that score is based on both achievement on YTOP and then growth on YTOP. And then there are some other indicators in those models like graduation rates or English language art, or English learners and how they do on their test. But by and large, just to note that there is a robust school accountability model for every school that gets a score every year, primarily based on YTOP scores. There's also the accreditation process, which was referenced earlier. That is something, again, the WDE works on with the department or with the state board, where we will go through a review of compliance with all of the laws on the books, as well as looking at the district assessment system. So what are all those assessments that the school district is using, again, to implement the standards to deliver that basket, in addition to the state YTOP test. And so our accreditation team will dig in and look at that district assessment system and then make recommendations to the board on the accreditation of those schools. Now, there are some times where a school sort of persistently fails to meet expectations. If that's the case, they will be recommended for an accreditation under review or with conditions, in which case they fall into our state system of support, where we have more intensive interventions in that school district going in, trying to figure out how to help them improve on the areas that are giving them those low scores. And so just with that, I'll, Madam Chair, pass it over to Director Hernandez, but that supports piece is big and something that we continually try to improve our game at the department on, is how we can better support districts, particularly those that fall into that not meeting category, into our state system of support.
Any questions for Mr. Shaner before we move on? Yeah, Senator Scott?
Yeah. The issue of what goes on when a school or a whole district is not up to standards, or is not producing students that are proficient in reading or math or something like that. I earlier asked, what do you do about such things? What can you legally do? And let me further ask, and maybe I ought to let the superintendent speak for herself, but I've heard her in the past say that there's problems with the staffing of the department to be able to do anything effective in this area, and she's had troubles with that. What can you do as a practical matter?
Mr. Shaner?
Madam Chair, through you, Senator Scott, that's something we've worked on a lot in recent history. There is a requirement in statute that a state system of support be created for schools that are not meeting expectations. And that, we started that work years ago with the state board to create that state system of support. We took some money out of other areas in the department's budget and created a state system of support budget. And that exists within our accreditation area. And so that team will use our personnel as well as vendors. And really, it starts with a root cause analysis where our team will go to that school and spend several days with them looking at all of the test scores, all of the metrics that we monitor, and try to really figure out what's at the heart of the issue. Is it, we need different curriculum, we need different training for the teachers, the principal needs support, any litany of issues that we identify. And then we will give them basically a corrective action plan that we will work with them on to help try to improve them. And we have, in recent years, we have moved schools out of, not meeting into partially meeting or meeting. So we have seen some success, but as teachers turn over, administrators turn over, students turn over, sometimes you have to go back to the drawing board. So it's a never ending, it's a continuous improvement type process that we work with those districts on and schools.
Superintendent, would you like to add some flavor to the questions?
Madam Chairman,
Answers?
Senator Scott, would just add with some of this, I mean, it is about continuous improvement. It's about bringing these supports to them. But in a lot of ways, there isn't a lot of teeth to that. And so, in a lot of ways, we can't force districts to, take up their recommended supports, that we partner with them. Largely we have good success and that we work together on that. But in terms of actual teeth as part of that there isn't. Now you could jump to accreditation and working through the state board of changing accreditation status. And we have recently had different, steps down of one school district on accreditation status. But that's largely the jump that you would have.
Okay, thank you for that. I think any other questions before we move on? Okay, go ahead. Oh, was there one more? Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Erickson. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just would like to have you put it in perspective, Mr. Shaner, if you could. I mean, we constantly hear these numbers of some that are not meeting the standards, and my understanding is that's extremely low number overall. Is that true? Can you put it in perspective as to how many you work with on a yearly basis? How many are not passing?
Madam Chair, through you, Representative Erickson, we do have that number, the ones. So it's if you're not meeting expectations for 3 years in a row, you get put into our state system of support. I don't know the exact number of that right now, but we can get it to you. And Director Hernandez has some more information, I think, as well.
Madam
Head
Chair,
Director.
Representative Erickson, I'm on that committee that goes, the statewide system of support team that goes and does those visits for those schools that are in critical need of support. Right now, there's about 7 districts that are included in that list, and not all the schools within each district. So overall, it's about 20 schools.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, Senator Roberts.
On that, and it sounds like from your last answer that we're doing it the way that I recall we set it up. The Accountability and Education Select Committee was very vocal about not just aggregating a single score to a school or to the district and then having that reflect the entirety, recognizing that if a district is failing consistently in one area, or if an individual school is failing in one area, that needs to be identified and not averaged out. So red flags should show up and be addressed through the statewide system of support. I'm hearing discussion of kind of district-wide scores and school scores. Are we still doing it the way that it was intended, where if a district fails, for example, college readiness, or a school fails college readiness 5 consecutive years and red flags on that, are they getting attention for that specific red flag, or is it just based on an aggregated basis?
Mr. Shaner?
Madam Chair, through you, Senator Rothfuss, it's on an individual school basis. And what Director Hernandez is referring to is they will they will take a deep dive into all the different metrics. So once that not meeting score hits, then they jump into the details on why they're at not meeting. So it's at a school level.
Okay.
Follow up?
Yeah,
Go
quick
ahead.
follow-up. But again, you've got a variety of different measures. Let's say, for example, that you're failing equity, but you're doing well overall in growth and you're doing well overall in performance and you're in elementary school. But for 5 straight years, you're red flagging equity. All right, that can happen. And that can happen based on demographics, for example. When we set up the accountability model, we wanted that school to flag in exactly the same way as one that flagged on 2 or 3. Because if you're red flagging any one of those, they're not supposed to be averaged. They're supposed to be addressed individually. And so my concern is, have we gotten to the point where we really are now averaging on a school basis? So, if you're good at growth and you're good at performance, but you're failing miserably on equity, you're still fine from the state's perspective. Where are we at on that?
Mr. Shaner?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator Rothfuss, we do at the department look at all of the performance on the different indicators, but it's a good point that if you're knocking it out of the park on 3 out of the 5 and the other 2 aren't low enough to drag you into not meeting, you're not going to get the same supports as someone who is in the red. So our supports are targeting the overall score, not the individual indicators.
Superintendent, do you have something to add?
Madam Chairman, if I could, this has been an area that we've discussed internally that needs some work. And the better part of the last year, we have been trying to update and look at data more carefully because a lot of it has been, broad strokes. And so that is something within, I'd say, about the last year that we've started to dive and over time too, looking at data trends over time. I don't think we've really looked at that. And so that's one area in particular. And Ms. Gokalea is not here, but that's something that she's been tasked with.
Right. Madam Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
and I appreciate the fact that that's being looked into, because it's been a long time, obviously, since we implemented that model. But that was something that the select committee felt very strongly about, the idea that problems aren't hidden through an averaging effect. And we had a lot of discussion about how easy that is. And it's the reason why we generally resisted having overall aggregate scores. We wanted specific scores for each of the metric, and we wanted to generally avoid aggregating those scores, because with an averaging effect, it's the old trick that, you're standing on 2 blocks. One of them's an ice block. The other one's 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but on average, they're nice and cool. Averaging doesn't always work, and an aggregate score doesn't always work. So I'm happy to hear that you're still looking at that on an individual basis and not trying to allow a circumstance where that can be blended in. Thank you.
Other questions, committee? Oh, let me go to Representative Kelly and then I'll come back. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I heard correctly, I was hearing that the state cannot coerce districts to accept support once they've been flagged for not meeting standards. And this is something I'd like to ask people from the districts as well as the WDE. Are there reasons given why they're not accepting support, or are there some issues with the support that they find might conflict with their own mission?
Anyone on the panel want to take that one on?
Madam Chair, through you, Representative Kelly, I can't say offhand a district that's outright refused our assistance and supports, especially the ones that are really struggling. The results, I would say overall have been positive in recent history, but there are times when, we can spend a lot of time with the district and not move the needle too. So, but they generally work with us.
Follow up, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so to be clear then they are accepting of the support. Do you ever get any specific requests for support that particularly maybe the state is not offering?
Panel?
Madam
Anybody on the
Chair.
panel?
Yeah, Madam Chair, through you, Representative Kelly, not that I'm aware of. We do everything we can to try to help, and I'm not aware of a district saying we need this type of support and us not being able to find some sort of option for them.
Representative Williams, did you still have a question before I, oh, changed your mind? Okay. Senator Scott.
I hear that, yes, we need to concentrate on in the individual schools and the individual districts that have the problems, and that is entirely accurate. But I also am starting to hear that there aren't that many of them. And I want to want to make a point. When you talk about the, what I think is a key metric, the third grade ability to read, but it shows in the math as well. It is a majority of the students that are not achieving proficient or advanced standing. And that has been the case. I don't know, in the more recent years, there may have been some, I think there's been some improvement, but it has been a majority of students that are in trouble. And we can see that in the pressure for the scholarship programs and the other alternatives to the public school system. And that deeply concerns me. Madam Chairman, I think we've got a major problem on our hands. And I think there's a number of reasons for it historically. The court decisions keep us from doing some of the things we need to do. The department has not historically been a difficulty in getting it properly staffed to deal with some of these problems and with getting some things that they can really do. But Madam Chairman, I think we need to watch what's going on here. This is not an isolated problem, it's a majority. And it includes this district that we're in right now, that I represent. And it includes the Cheyenne district. So it's a widespread problem, Madam Chairman. And I think it is something we need to really look at. What do you do when you get a school that just is not performing?
Don't you agree? There was a question there, I think. No, actually, Representative Guggemos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you speak to what you have found with those schools or districts that were struggling when you did go in to help them? Were they not following their instruction and teaching? Can you speak to what was the cause?
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, Representative Guggenmoss, there have been, the majority of them have made a shift to a more standards focused instruction, and that has made improved gains for them. Many of them this spring when we visited said that when they looked at their winter interim YTOP results, they already saw improvements. And so some of it's been just a focus more on understanding what's really the rigor of the standards. Several of them had said that maybe they were surface level instruction on the standards, but really identifying what the standard is asking for and looking at that verb. So if it's asking to evaluate versus identify, those are two different levels of rigor. So they've really put a more focus on what's being asked in those standards, making sure their instruction aligns to that. And then there's some that have made some staffing changes as well to maybe remove teachers that weren't producing the results, and even principals have been part of that as well.
Madam Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Madam Chair, would just add, and so important to keep in mind, and we can send out to the committee as well of the different 4 levels that a school could fall into and how many are in each one of them, and kind of those staggered supports, because I believe that with the 20 schools that would probably be are not meeting expectations. 3 or more years, yes. So just to keep that in mind. And then I would also say too, as well as we have teams across the agency that will come in and offer these supports, but we only have 1 employee within the state system of support at the Department of Education. And so just to be aware of that when we're talking the scale of schools, that's what we have here. And so we say we come in with all these supports, but I just want to be realistic about what that actually looks like.
Senator Rothfuss.
And, you know, along the lines of what the superintendent was just saying, we definitely envisioned when we created the Accountability in Education Act that there would be more support available from the Department of Education through additional FTEs to actually provide the system of support. And it is us. We didn't do that. The legislature did not implement the system of supports as it was intended. We didn't add those positions. So if we don't like the system of supports, we just look around the legislature and point to ourselves. The WDE has, I think, done a great job with the resources they have. And it's the fact that we probably needed to give them 4 or 5 more employees to actually do that work. So when they're identifying the prioritized schools, they have to do that with one employee in mind. You know, how much work can that one employee do? And if we want to go further down the list and provide a system of supports that digs deeper, there's an easy solution for that, right? A second employee is going to do twice as much work, and so on.
Any other questions? Okay. Anything else? WD, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So going back a little bit in the standards review process, one thing that's really important to note when we have that 40-member committee, which is educators and stakeholders that look at the standards and develop those standards, we have a design that they look at, a standards design, and it includes all of the things in the Common Core of Knowledge and Common Core of Skills. And so they look at that set of skills and identify which ones are most relevant to that content area. So it's sometimes really easy and evident, and other times it's looking to see what makes the most sense. And so throughout the 10 content areas that are developed, those Common Core of Skills are embedded within where it's appropriate. And then there's always been question too about in the Common Core of Knowledge, we have humanities, but we don't have a separate set of standards around that. So I want to make sure you're aware too that that's embedded throughout the social studies, ELA, and arts standards as appropriate. So the last time that the basket was edited was in 2018 with the addition of computer science. And with that, giving the districts their 3 years to implement, that was to be fully implemented by the 22-23 school year. And it seems like now that we're a few years past that, the implementation has been very successful, and we had our Wyoming Boot Up initiative that helped with that as well. And then going into the board's resolution where they wanted the reduction of standards, as you heard Superintendent Dagenfelder say, I just want to reiterate that 7 of those 10 content areas have been fully adopted in Chapter 10 rules through the Board of Education, and 2 of the content areas, ELA and CTE, have been fully developed by a committee, have been through the informal input process, and is in the final phase with the State Board of Education to decide if rules promulgation is ready. There's some edits that were made after input was collected, and so there's some additional work being reviewed on that input and that revision that's been done, but it is in the final stages on those 2 as well. And then our last one that rounds out the 10th content area is social studies, which is currently under revision by the committee. They started their work in February. They'll be continuing to virtually meet this week and maybe get that wrapped up as well. And then that will go to the State Board of Education for consideration of collecting informal input on those as well. Then through the committee, or excuse me, through the legislative session that you recently had, you heard a lot of input around discussion of this basket of goods and what should be considered in that as well. And so just to highlight a couple of those that I heard, there was discussion around financial literacy, and that's also been heard during testimony at the State Board of Education. Also workforce readiness, soft skills, and AI integration. And so in the basket of goods, you know, it was never meant to be static. It was meant to be moving with the times and with the needs of making sure our students are best prepared. And for several years now, we've said that's kind of a hard target to hit. We don't know what 12 years from now or 13 years from now looks like for some of those students. And so that is one thing that's also discussed in those committee meetings as the standards are being produced is, you know, what makes the most sense for making sure these students can think critically. You know, they have those skills to be able to communicate effectively. They have the ability to problem solve, and they are given situations and opportunities to demonstrate that and build that skill. And then also discussion was heard around the different types of assessments. And so on the third page of the memo, I do have those different assessments that are offered at the state and national level. The first 5 bullets are the state assessments that we offer. And so to understand those various assessments and the requirements, I'm just going to hit those real quickly. I know that Tanya hit some of the requirements on that, and that 1% cap that is in statute is designated to that summative assessment. So sometimes you might hear districts say that YTOP takes longer than the 1%. They might be talking about the optional interims and additional pieces that are added on to help support them. But in the statute, it's referring to the summative test at the end of the year.
Question, Mr. Rothfuss?
Thanks,
Or
Madam
Senator Rothfuss, sorry.
Honestly, one of the things that I've heard is that in the interpretation of the statute, there was guidance that allowed like all of the training and preparation and practices that districts do ahead of taking the test to basically not count towards the 1%. So the 1% is being interpreted specifically as the time for the test, and that districts will spend a lot of time preparing students to take the test, and that can even take just as much time as the test itself. Is that accurate? Is that a guidance that districts are assuming? Is that coming from WDE? And I honestly, I've had a lot of concern about that. Everyone wants the playing field level, but that seems to be effectively part of the test as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Director Hernandez?
Madam Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, we don't include the prep time and the practice time in our testing time. We do monitor time and have for 9 years now, and it is when the student starts the session and then ends the session. And so over time, it is about 0.6% of the time that testing is taking place. So even when you add in the practice and the setup, it falls within that 1%.
Okay. Madam Chairman, a quick follow-up. Somehow it doesn't feel that way, and I'm saying this as a parent now. I've got 2 kids right now, they're taking it, and I had 2 more that took it for the whole time that they were in school. And it seems like they're taking that test forever. And I think that's why we hear a lot anecdotally that there's too much testing associated with the YTOP, because from my impression from my kids, it seems like the entire week practically of YTOP is taking the YTOP test. And this is a mismatch that I really don't understand. And talking to them, what are you doing? And so much is disrupted that it just seems like that 1% is being calculated in a way that doesn't incorporate the entirety of how much time is really being dedicated to the test. It ends up being a lot more disruptive than I think we intended with that 1%. I don't know what the solution is there. I have absolutely no idea, but it is a concern that I have. And again, my N equals 4 data points sort of support that. What are your thoughts on that? I see the superintendent's interested as well.
State Superintendent, go ahead.
Madam Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, this is feedback that we've received as well and concerns. And one in particular was around the K2 interim that was completely optional. And so actually as part of our assessment reduction plan, we actually cut that and don't have that because it was interpreted by those teachers that it was enforced and mandatory. And so we're trying to communicate more and more of the optionality of it. Now, whether a district, what they choose to do, and I'm sure it's across the board, different. But that was one area, K2 in particular, that we made the decision to go ahead and pull that back and provide further resources instead of even offering it.
Madam Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, also what we've heard is, and it's different in every district and how they're going to approach it, how they're going to schedule it. But sometimes we hear, well, it's just easier to keep our bell schedule the same. And so then it does seem like some schools choose to have a little bit more common disruption across the week. But as for each individual test, like for each content area, we keep that to that level. And when I say 0.6%, I am saying the average. So there may be students individually that may take longer and others that take shorter. But on average, each of those content areas takes about 1.5 to 2.5 hours, depending, which includes ELA, math, science. And so each grade, as it's spread out, any one student is only taking up to 3 of the tests, either ELA, writing and math, or ELA, math and science. And so when you look at that over time, it's about 6 hours per student.
Madam Chairman.
Go ahead.
One other thing that I would add, we did also have a discussion during our assessment reduction plan process of at the high school level. We do assess one additional time beyond what is required by the feds. And so 9th and 10th grade discussing, do we actually want to have the YTOP for both of those grades? And we had some sessions with superintendents, with principals, and discussion was that they liked that data, that data from year to year to see growth, to be able to utilize that. And so there really wasn't a tremendous amount of appetite to cut one of those. And so we didn't pursue it further.
Madam Chairman.
Yeah, follow up and then I'll.
And I think that's an important point, and it's the regrettable reason why we end up doing it every year, because you can't get growth data if you don't have every year. We understood certainly when we were working on this process that growth data was really more important than actual summative assessment data. And therein lies the challenge. It's actually regrettable we don't have it in 11th grade, and we don't have a solution for that, to have continuation of that growth. But yeah, we have challenges there. But I appreciate the fact that, again, there's still a lot of work being done to try and find ways to reduce that burden on districts in terms of the total amount of time students are away from learning and testing instead. Thank you.
I think Representative Kelly has a question also. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'd like to shift gears briefly. This is maybe a larger question, but when I've got this much firepower in the same place, it's a chance to ask it. The alternative assessment, when we're looking at roughly 1% of kids with the most severe cognitive disabilities, I'm struggling to find the practicality of this test, because having worked in special education, the diversity and range of their abilities and talents are so different. And the new group of kids come in and they're all different than the kids from the year before. What's the practical reason for having this alternative assessment? I mean, why do we really need this?
Director, go ahead.
Madam Chairman, Representative Kelly, there's a federal requirement to make sure that all students have that opportunity and have equal opportunity. And I know it is challenging at times, as you know, and as you said, there's a wide range. So there are students that can perform, and we do have students that have advanced level proficiency on that YALT assessment. And so it is mostly about giving that opportunity to demonstrate what they know and can do.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, go ahead, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Back to the YTOP, I have a hard time really understanding, it seems like the shifting curve really from year to year, how we measure student performance, and this the scale score. Could you help me understand how that how the department sets that, and how that affects the students that would be in scoring proficient?
I don't know who wants to take that.
Madam Chairman, I'll pass it to Director Hernandez, but this is something that comes up commonly, and a lot of folks believe that we score on a bell curve, and we don't. And so we're continuously trying to find ways that we explain how this works. And so I think it's an important question, and we're trying to communicate to teachers as well, because I think there's misunderstanding about how it is scored. So, but I'll pass to Ms. Hernandez to speak in detail.
Go ahead, Director.
Madam Chairman, thank you. So yes, the assessment after a new blueprint is developed and then assessed, students understanding on those standards. There is an event called a standards setting where we convene a group of educators the summer after that first administration. That's what's going to happen this summer as well. And they look at the test. They look at like an example test of what a student might have seen with a variety of items from easiest ability to most difficult. And they go through that with a content lens, since they're the content experts and understand what students can do in the classroom at those grade levels and in that content area. They look at those items, they look at the content, they then look at the data that was produced from that first administration of the test, and they make determinations about where those cuts are. And so to start that work, they take the standards and the performance level descriptors, They take those and they narrow it down even further to what is a just barely ability to meet that standard. And so those just barely statements are developed to guide them as they go through to set that cut and to keep the lens of what would 50% of students be able to do in this content or in this standard to meet that cut. So as they go through that book, they develop their first cut of where do you see it transition from a below basic level to a basic level based on the performance level descriptors and barely statements. They make that cut, and then they go through and they do another cut where it transfers over into that proficient area, and then another cut where it transitions into that advanced level. So the PLDs, or the performance level descriptors, are already written at those 4 levels by the educator committee that creates the standards. So they've already got that blueprint. Now, I'm going to take us back a few years. In 2012, when I started the work in standards, those PLDs were created after the first administration of an assessment in the standard setting event. And I always thought that didn't make a lot of sense. It made sense to give that blueprint and that roadmap to teachers on the front end. So in 2012 through 2014, we went through our standards review cycles and started implementing those PLDs in the standards review process. So they were developed on the front end and teachers knew and had that roadmap. So going back to the standard setting where those cut scores are set, then that's where we set the scale score on the vendor's measurement scale. And so one thing that is important to note, as the superintendent said, those are not norm reference tests. They are criterion referenced. In a norm reference test, a student's score is compared to other students, and that's not what we have with YTOP. Instead, their score is based on their performance on the standards. And so the criterion is the state standards. And so those ELA standards were set in 2018. Math was set also in 2018, and science was reset in 2022 after the standards were reapproved. So those have been consistent for several years, and for ELA and math, they've been consistent the entire time we've had YTOP. But this summer, we will have a new event to reset those or to evaluate if there's a reset needed for math and science. And then as we move to a new vendor next year, we'll have to do that standard setting again for all 3 content areas to then align it to the new vendor's measurement scale.
No follow-up? Okay, good. Any other questions? Yes, Senator Scott?
Follow up on that. And I'm going to want to ask the department if what I'm saying still applies or if the feds have changed something. First, I would say the stability in the YTOP has been very, very useful because you can get the same score means the same thing from year to year. And I think that's very important. YTOP divides students into 4 categories: below basic, proficient, and advanced. The federal NAEP test, National Assessment of Educational Progress, which has a very good reputation, has the same 4 divisions. When you compare the Wyoming YTOP results with the national results, we are more lenient in our rating. You can compare only at the statewide level because that's the data we get from the feds, and they don't do it every year. It's every other year, is it not? But we have been 5 or 6 points showing better in terms of the students that were in the proficient and advanced categories fairly consistently. My understanding is that is continuing in recent years to have about that difference. We got some professional advice 5 years ago in the 2020 recalibration process. The recalibration consultants said that if the students that in the reading, and they talked math as well, the students that were showing basic and below basic on our Y-top test would not be able to perform in the kind of high-tech economy we're trying to build as adults. So that gave us some advice as to what our Y-top means. I think the important thing is consistency, but it is important to note that we are not quite as rigorous as the feds are. And I think that continues, does it not? So that gives you some notion of what those scores mean as a practical matter. So am I right in thinking that the gap between us and the NAEP results has stayed relatively constant over the years?
Director or superintendent, or whoever would like to take that on. Okay, go ahead, Director.
Madam Chairman, Senator Scott, I will back up 1 second and then answer your question. I did forget to say, when we do the standard setting for Y-top, we also look at how our results were in performing on NAEP and use that as a benchmark to make sure that we're keeping a high bar as well. So when we set that proficiency scale, we are looking to make sure we're keeping a rigorous expectation and a high bar. And then that's why we're producing so well on NAEP results too, because it is lined up and we're showing that expectation similarly. But it is important to know that NAEP, the framework and the requirements, they are rigorous and they are high level. And so a lot of times it would be easier to look at the NAEP basic to compare to our proficiency.
And Madam Chairman, if I could
Go
add to
ahead.
that.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Scott, they, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, we can get those, but they're a lot closer than most other states. What we've seen, over time is that a lot of states have watered down, their standards, their assessment at the state level. And so you have a huge discrepancy between their scores on NAEP versus their state assessment. And I think that's something we should be proud of, and we should keep that bar high because it's important.
Madam Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
I think our bar is appropriate. It is interesting to see the correlation with the federal, and they're a little more rigorous, but Madam Chairman, I think we'd use them, except that you can't get results at anything at a statewide basis from them. So I think that they do show that our test results have been meaningful. The real question is, in my mind, is I don't think we have had an adequate system for doing anything about the problems that we do see. And I think we've explored that a bit. So I don't think it's the fault of the State Department, but it's something that we need to do, that frankly, I'd like to see the next governor do something about. We haven't been able to hire the kind of people that we need to go out and work with the districts that are having trouble, and we don't have the teeth to give them some authority.
Director Hernandez or State Superintendent, Mr. Shaner, anything else to wrap up?
Do you have anything? Okay,
Go ahead.
one more.
Madam Chairman, so I did have some information, since there was also discussion in your session about NAEP results. And I wanted to just kind of walk you through a little bit about that attachment to help you understand what we have presented here. So our NAEP state coordinator is Will Donkersgood, and he's put together this information for you. As I go through some of this, I want to point out some caveats as well as we go through this. So in attachment A, you'll find that we've put this data together in cohorts so that you can see as time 1 students, when they took the NAEP test in grade 4, and then 4 years later, time 2 is when those students took it in grade 8. Okay. In addition, I'm just going to give a caveat right out the gate to make sure that as we look at this study, just remember it's not longitudinal data. It's not reflecting exactly the same students from time 1 to time 2. We know that it's a sampling of students across the schools and across the students. It's not always going to be the same schools that are selected. It's not always going to be the same students within the school, as sometimes they move and students come in and out. So this is just representing a point in time snapshot. So on page 2 of the attachment, this is a figure that's showing you all of the states and territories. So the end count is 52, and you can see Wyoming is in red, and you can see that red dot there. There is a strong tie between scores over time from grade 4 to grade 8 in this study here. The Pearson coefficient R equals 0.9 means the fact that it's positive means that both variables are moving in the same direction. And it's on a scale of -1 to +1. So therefore 0.9 is a strong relationship. So we are seeing a strong relationship between performance in grades 4 and 8. Some things to note as we look at the data over time, the pandemic was a factor in this, and that it also broke a year of our testing, our NAEP testing. And so you'll see that it shifts from odd years to even years. And if you go into page 4, you'll see table 1. This is where we have the cohort information. So cohort 1, time 1 was grade 4 students in 2013, and then grade 8 in 2017. Cohort 2 was grade 4 in 2015 and grade 8 in 2019, 4 years later. Those are all pre-pandemic. And then cohort 3, when it was grade 4 in 2019 and grade 8 in 24. And that's where it shifted from odd to even years. As you go across this table, you'll see average scale scores for Wyoming results in grade 4 and 8 for both math and reading. And as you continue to the right, you'll see the Wyoming rankings. And I do want to state that ranking, the one caveat is that the ranking state results should be considered with great care. You know, again, remembering that we have a variety of students in that sampling, and the reality is that there's sampling variability that is inherent in these results. So ranking can lead to a false inference, so we want to be very careful about that. So for example, in that 2024, where we ranked 13th with an average scale of 278 in math, that same time, New Jersey had a scale of 282 and ranked 6th. But those 4 points didn't make a reliable difference when you look at it statistically. And in grade 8 for Wyoming, those results were not statistically significantly different from 18 other states. So when you chart it like that first figure and it looks like we're at a certain area, it's important to know that the states that are around us statistically are similar. And so it is just a caveat when you're looking at ranking. But the important thing on this table is to the far right, you do see a strong relationship between grade 4 and grade 8 performance across all of those years, ranging from 0.81 to 0.9. Okay, in that strong relationship, this produced 3 distinct cohorts with 6 statistical tests. So it wasn't just a one-time, it wasn't a one-off. You can see that over several years there. And grade 4 performance does appear to be fairly predictive of students' subsequent performance in grade 8. This level of correlation or similarity in ranking rank ordering of variability is considered a relatively strong or robust statistical relationship in the education and behavior sciences. So there is a good correlation here in the prediction of results from one year to the next across time. And as such, the Wyoming relative strong grade 4 results can be considered a competitive edge for comparing our grade 8. However, there's no guarantee to ensure future outcomes. So that's that other caveat I wanted to note. And as we conclude, there is no relationship between correlation and causation. That the grade 4 NAEP results don't perfectly foretell future grade 8 results across the states. So no perfect one-to-one correspondence is found on these state scores and ranking between grade 4 and 8, and there's no causal relationship found in this study. Madam Chairman, I am ready to stand for any questions.
Questions for Director Hernandez? Yes, go ahead, Representative Bratton.
Thank you for being here and for that report. So as I looked and looked at some of this data, I would agree with you on the reading scores. However, I want to confirm when you were talking about it not being statistically significant decline in the rankings in particular on the math scores. I would agree on the reading scores, but on the math scores in the 8th grade math scores from 2017 to 2024, and those were declining. That would be 289, 286, and then down to 278. Are you saying that's not statistically significant?
Director, go ahead.
Madam Chairman, Representative Bratton, yes, those seem like a larger number when you're looking at 8 points, but statistically, it's not a significant drop.
Or just as a standard deviation, or what are you?
Well, Madam Chairman, I'm not a psychometrician, so I am just going to kind of try to give it in common language. There are a lot of people that are way smarter than me that go into developing the statistical analysis of these things. We do see that there's that drop in that Pearson coefficient on the right side that you were kind of referencing over time as you're looking at math 0.9 to 0.87 to 0.81. So numbers wise, that does appear to be a drop. On the scale score, that does appear to be a drop. But then statistically comparing across all of the information, this was Wyoming. When you compare it across all of the other states, it's not a statistically significant drop comparatively.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, go ahead, Senator Office.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. On that, I don't know if did you see it was Educational Opportunity Project at Stanford that released an analysis of NAEP scores earlier this month in May. I don't know if you saw that. It was a high profile story in the New York Times that provided the data. And it seems to indicate, again, they're looking nationwide. They do analysis at district level and state level, but then looking nationwide as well. And it seems to conclude kind of the contrary, which is that it is a significant decline nationwide in the education that's achieved and they were looking from 2015 to 2025 as their analysis, primarily using NAEP score. I thought, and again, looking at this and looking at it consistent with the data that you just presented for the state of Wyoming, we're a part of that same decline. So while we've actually moved ahead of other states during the decline, certainly in 4th grade reading, everyone's falling. We didn't fall quite as fast. But I do find this a little disconcerting. And the impression I get from the Stanford project is that they do feel that this is statistically significant as a nationwide trend where somehow, for one reason or another, question marks as to why we are not teaching students as well as we were a decade ago. I don't know if you saw that. If you haven't seen it, I won't ask any follow-up questions on that particularly, but have you seen that study from Stanford?
Director or Mr. Shannon?
Madam Chair, through you, Senator Rothfuss, yes, we have. And we have not had a chance to dig into it yet, but we've received it. We got advance notice of it and looked at where Wyoming was. And it's a good point. It's a great study, and we need to evaluate our performance relative to that analysis.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, and I think we fared better than others because I dug into Wyoming's in it as well. But it was disconcerting to see that and how significant their findings are relative to education. So that's something, and we don't need to go into it today, but maybe this is something as we're looking, Madam Chairman, one of our priorities is, why are we falling in NAEP scores? Why are we having some of these struggles between 4th and 8th grade? I think digging into what's going on there and understanding maybe some of their conclusions. That's something that perhaps we can talk about at our next meeting and dig a little more into that Stanford study.
Yes, and I would add, Senator Office, I'm going to blame it on cell phones. Of course, you know me, that's,
Well, I
think
that's false.
I think
Yeah,
that's really an issue. I do.
You're right.
But I did have one question, when you were talking about the results. I thought it was interesting that we didn't fall quite as far down the list during COVID. Did we bounce back quicker because we weren't shut down as long, or do you have any ideas on that? The results that you presented here with the cohorts?
Yeah. Madam Chairman, yes, we saw that with our state results as well. We fared better than the nation overall. We were one of, I think, 7 states that got right back into school, and had all 7 states had data that represented, less of a decline than the rest. So in our state data, where we had about a 1 to 3% drop, nationwide, it was more like 7 to 14%.
And Madam Chairman,
Sure, go ahead.
not having the precise data to back it up, but I do believe personally that it's a result of us having more in-person school time than any other state in the country during the pandemic and getting our kids back to school.
Yeah, I would agree. Thank you. Other questions for anybody from WDE? We've got a lot of information. Thank you, Director Hernandez and Mr. Shaner and State Superintendent. Appreciate all your good work. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and bring up our State Board of Education. Welcome, it's good to see you. Please introduce yourself, even though we know who you are. Morning.
Madam Chair, members of the board and the committee, welcome. Thank you for allowing us to come and visit with you. My name is Mark Mathern, and I am the current chair of the State Board of Education. I have with me our co-chair or vice chair, RJ Cost, and our coordinator, Diana Clapp. You had asked us to make a comment on the basket of goods and our connection to that. So I'd like to cover just a few things. You've heard some of this already this morning. I do want to point out that indeed the crux of all of this is connected to the state standards. And it's our responsibility to help adopt the state standards, to help create those standards. But the standards really are 3 parts. There's the content standards, there's the performance standards, how good is good enough, and then there are the graduation standards. And the graduation standards is a group of standards that we have just added in the last year or so based on advice from the Attorney General. So we had not had graduation standards prior to this time. I do want to point out 3 significant actions that we've taken as we've worked with these 3 different types of standards. One you've already heard this morning, and that's the reduction of the volume of the content standards. We went from, I think, around 2,000 standards to somewhere around 1,000 standards, give or take. And part of that was not to reduce the rigor. Part of it was to accept the understanding from our educators that no matter how long they had, they could not get through all of the standards. As a matter of fact, I think Bob Marzano says students would have to go to school through age 30 in order to get through all of the standards that we had in front of our students. So we worked hard on reducing those, and where we started was the whole reality of what school districts were doing already. They were prioritizing the standards. They were picking the ones that were more important than others. And so that's where we started. We said, let's just start with the priority standards and let's see if we need to add from there. Now, we didn't do that ourselves. We brought educators together and said, which of these are top priority? The piece that's important, I think, for the committee to know is each district was prioritizing their own standards. this led to some issues about uniformity in the state. And so we took that upon ourselves to say, what are the priorities for any school in the state of Wyoming? And that's the set of standards that we are working on currently. The second part of this is really connected to the idea of guaranteed and viable. And it's one thing to say, here are the 1,000 standards that we want students to know. It's another thing to say, can those standards be delivered in the time that we have in 13 years? Can we get these standards delivered? And so we ask our curriculum directors, which was never part of the review process before until the current board asked that we build that in. So we now have a curriculum advisory committee. We call it the CDAC. They come together every time we create a new set of standards, and they look at the standards and try to connect it to all 10 content areas. So for example, right now we're working on CTE standards. So do the career and technical education standards fit into the entire basket of goods? One component of that is what the legislature has said, and that is that reading, writing, and math shall be emphasized in grades K through 8. So the board has said in their guidance letter to each of these committees, if you have to reduce, or if you have to, I don't know if the right word is err, but the idea of, where do you rob from Peter to pay Paul? It was really the idea of the legislature saying reading, writing, and math is number one. The other content areas are important, but reading, writing, and math are number one. The third piece of this is the connection to graduation standards. And I want to point out that part of our work really was, rather than just looking into the math standards or the science standards or the history standards and saying, which of these are the most important to graduate? We went out through a series of listening sessions that took well over a year. We talked to well over 500 people, if not 1,000. One of the first things they said was, before you set graduation standards, let's reduce the number of content standards. So we did that. The second thing we heard from businesses and from community members is not the issue of whether students know information, it's whether they can apply it and transfer it into a new environment, especially when they move from middle school to high school and from high school to college. And so part of our graduation standards are really connected to that ability to transfer and apply the knowledge that they've gained in high school. We don't think you can do that unless you're out in the community doing that. So if indeed, and I made the mistake the other day in a conference I was in where I misused the Pythagorean theorem. And as a math teacher sitting here, he was smiling when I did it. But the point is, as a Latin teacher, I was having problems trying to figure out where would I apply the Pythagorean theorem. What I was discussing was actually the formula for volume, which I didn't realize till later. But my point is, it's the value of applying and transferring. So if we can get our students through the profile out into the community, having them do job shadowing, having them do different components with FFA or any of these other programs beyond what's happening in the classroom, that, in the board's opinion, is the definition of a graduate in Wyoming. And it's just not our opinion. This is about the community saying the kids know how to do the formula. They don't know how to apply it when it comes to the real world. And so when you look at our graduation standards, and I think we included a copy of the profile for the committee, you will see things in those graduation standards around competency. It's around that idea of being able to master, apply, and transfer that information. We have 7 graduation standards, all based on the competencies that were derived from the profile. And currently, school districts are working then, and I think you heard from the department, the idea that districts have a number of years to figure out how to put these things in place. So they are currently working on how are we going to make these graduation standards fit into the overall graduation policies that districts have. That chapter, chapter 3, we call it, was just signed by the governor not too long ago. And so school districts are currently working on that process. So that's the third piece I wanted to talk about. The other piece I did want to point out in terms of the basket of goods, and Representative Kelly brought up the idea of special education. We've had several conversations around the extended standards. We've had conversations around certificates of completion. We currently do not have in statute an option to create an alternative diploma. We do have something called a certificate of completion. It's generally for the 1% of students that we have out there. Interestingly enough, in federal rules, there is an allowance for an alternative diploma, but we don't have one in Wyoming. In some of our conversations with the accountability committees that we're working on, parents have brought up this idea, why can't we have an alternative diploma in Wyoming? We didn't see that as what I would call low-hanging fruit. We thought this would take a legislative approach. And so we currently are not having that discussion and sort of thinking about that as phase 2. The other part with special populations is the whole gifted and talented component. And that is done through the accreditation process. When we accredit schools, one of the questions that the review team at the department asks is, how do you address the needs of gifted and talented students? And certainly the dual credit committees that came out of recalibration, some of the advanced courses, those kinds of things were certainly in place for some of our gifted and talented program. Finally, the other thing we do, and you may or may not be aware of this depending on your length of time on the committee, but every November we send, or maybe it's December, we send a letter to the Education Committee for the Legislature saying, here's the work we've been doing this past year. And so you at least are kept up to speed. So if I could maybe just summarize, what I would point out is our current emphasis really seems to be around the profile of a graduate and around graduation standards. And the reason that's so important is it really goes back to this idea of the accountability model. And my question to the committees that are working on it is, what in the accountability model are we missing that isn't reflective of the profile of a graduate? The superintendent has also put a challenge in front of these committees to say, what in the accountability model are we missing that schools are doing really a good job at? For example, the 1%. When these students are leaving with a certificate of completion, our current Wyoming accountability model does not acknowledge that. We consider that student a dropout. We don't give them credit for that, yet they've done everything they're supposed to do to meet that certificate of completion. So that's one example that the current group is working on. We intend to bring forward some changes to the accountability model. We're going to start with phase 1 of things we can change internally. Phase 2 is coming back to the legislature to say, we think there are some tweaks in the model that are worth making. We're not ready for that at this point. So Madam Chair, I'll stand for questions. I do want to ask Diana if she had any other pieces. A lot of times I forget things that she says, Mark, make sure you say this, but I forget them. So anything you would like
Ms.
to
Clapp, would you like to add anything? No? Okay. Go ahead if you'd like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Just wanted to follow up maybe a piece of support. Since Senator Rothfuss mentioned some of the work out of Stanford, I didn't catch the name of the report, but similar reports they've done with the PACE as far as recovery from COVID and just supporting a couple of the barriers they talk about is tying students to grade level assignments, right? And also that notion of that Carnegie unit for credit. And so thinking about those nationally identified possible barriers for not only graduation rates, but again, academic recovery, it's really exciting to see that the people of Wyoming knew what the needs for their students are, that ability to apply and transfer. The legislature foresaw that. You put into statute options for in-classroom and out-of-classroom experience and learning. And the notion of competency-based education, even though the definition of that might not, or it might not look the same as it did when those pieces came into Wyoming statutes, it's there and available for the board and the department to work with districts to start moving on those pieces, even down to the notion of a Carnegie unit, not demanded in statute when you look at your basket of goods. So a lot of things laid out in place, foundational to this idea of how do we continue to break down those barriers and really grab hold of that pacing for that academic recovery.
Questions for Ms. Clapp or Mr. Mathern? Oh, go ahead, Senator.
The total number of standards, you say you've come down from 2,000 to about 1,000. That strikes me as way too many to effectively manage to. The testimony was that I think the legislature said that reading, writing, and mathematics were the key ones in each grade. If you had a standard on each one of those for 12 grades, that would be 36 standards. I think that having those three serve as a primary grades pretty well. As you get junior high and high school, you obviously need some more. Would it be feasible to reduce your total number of standards to not 36, which would be three and multiply by 12 grades, but somewhere around a dozen in the graduating area and lesser numbers as you got lower? Would it be feasible to reduce your total number of standards to somewhere in the vicinity of not 1,000, but 100, 120, somewhere in that area, so that you'd have a reasonable number you could manage to in each grade?
Mr.
Madam
Mather?
Chair, a couple of things, Senator Scott. One of the pieces that's really important when we think about the standards is when we say, what do you want students to know? For us to say, we want them to know how to read isn't enough. We have to give teachers, parents, and the students themselves direction on what we mean by that concept. And so rather than coming up with an arbitrary number of 12 or 100 or 6 or whatever, we went to the educators and said, which are the standards that you think are the most important to get students to know to read? And they have reduced that number to what they believe might be a reasonable amount. The second piece I would add to that, it isn't just the piece about knowing the standard, it's also about the process of being tested on them. So I'm going to use my famous example that I've worn out. And it's the idea of a standard that says all children should be able to walk. Okay, well, what do you need to walk? Well, if you're a baby, you probably need to roll over first. Then you need to like grab furniture and pull yourself up. Then you need to take assisted steps. And then you need to walk on your own. I just named 4 things. A pediatrician might name 40 things. So what we've done with the state board is said, let's separate the idea of what do you need to know from the idea of where should we test you? And so part of our effort, Senator, is removing the number of times we are asking students to be tested on the standards. For example, in PE, physical education, we require that the standards be taught in K2 and 3, 5, and 6, 8. Grades K2, 3, 5, and 6, 8. But we don't ask that every single standard be tested in the district assessment system. So that's part of how we've lessened the impact of all of these standards, particularly in grades K through 8. Now in math and in science and in language arts, we require testing at each of those levels, to your point. I hope that helps.
Other questions for the State Board of Education? Yes, go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I want to ask you about the certificate of completion, because I know when I've been in schools speaking with my, some of my principals, they're frustrated because my understanding is that doesn't count towards the school's graduation rate for the cohort.
Correct.
And yet that is a success to some degree. Would that require a statute change, or is that a rule that's promulgated?
Mr. Matherin?
Madam Chair, I do believe it requires a statute change. I think statute specifically states it as a certificate of completion. The legislature asked us to promulgate the rules for the creation of that certificate. And I believe in our rules, we specifically say this is not an alternative diploma.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, Senator Ruffus.
On that, the reason is federal law. And that's not to say that we couldn't also count it in an additional way. But when we created that category, we did it consistent with federal law on what they count for, and it's a 4-year graduation rate. We went back, I believe, and we internally do a calculation of up to a 6-year graduation rate. But again, that's the justification for it is consistency with the federal required reporting for graduation rate, and that's the way it's written. Nothing says that we couldn't have our own internal calculation and do it, but just for the background on it, that's the why of it.
Madam Chair, if I could.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Matherin.
I do want to point out to the committee that there's a difference between accountability at the federal level and accountability at the state level. We have our own accountability system, which Senator Rothfuss is referring to. And it's within that system that I think we have a lot more flexibility. And we could indeed amend the accountability system to more accurately reflect what Wyoming values. I do want to point out one example. Senator Rothfuss brought up PSR, post-secondary readiness. We know that just because you get a good score on the ACT does not mean you're going to be successful at the university. We know that. It helps, but it doesn't mean it's a done deal. So the committees that are currently working on this idea of what is post-secondary readiness. RJ Cost calls it future ready. That future ready looks very different than just a score on an ACT. Maybe it is the ability to do well at some job site. Maybe it is the idea of having a senior project that is connected with your FFA project. Maybe there are ways to say to, as I sit in the audience watching these students cross that stage, maybe there's a way to say, there goes a student who's ready for their next challenge in life, even though they didn't do so well on the ACT. We have other types of evidence that say they are ready. Maybe it's a score on the ASVAB. Maybe it's their 9th grade reading score. Maybe there are other ways we can define the word ready that isn't just the ACT test.
Other questions? Just to follow up, just to the good Representative Bratton's question. So if we went with an alternative diploma, which that apparently is an option, would that take care of the issues with the dropout rates with graduation? Would that deal with it? I mean, you said that was an option we've never taken advantage of. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, I think it would help with, the 1% of students who are currently not considered as part of accountability for the definition of dropout. But would it take care of our dropout rate? No.
Gotcha.
And Madam Chairman. And therein lies the challenge whenever anybody reports on or in the news, when they look at the graduation rate, they're always going to report the federal graduation rate. And the federal graduation rate, because that's what's reported, is very strict. So when we show a dropout also, they didn't necessarily drop out. They didn't meet their 4-year graduation rate. So we have a lot of students that we do get across the finish line, but if it takes a 5th year, as far as the report that makes the newspapers is concerned, that student dropped out even though we got them across the finish line. And that's a challenge that we've been fighting forever. We'll keep fighting. So we can take these actions, but unfortunately then when you see the number, you'll still be annoyed that these students didn't get accounted for.
Any other questions for the committee? Mr. Cost, anything you'd like to add, former senator?
Chance to talk.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Joint Committee. I think I like it better up there than down here, but that's okay. I want to kind of help you to think about school and where it needs to go a little bit. When you start talking about people being future ready, how many of you have gone out to a job and only dealt with one standard in our standards? It's multiple standards that you have to be ready for when you're out on a job. And problem solving, critical thinking, and all of those also enter in. So the more that we can have our students experience that, the better off they have of being ready for the future, whatever that could be. One of my frustrations is when we say, are they college ready or career ready? Well, help me understand why we separated those. Future ready covers both. Some courses need college, some courses need higher level, some courses need certifications. Our CTE programs and all fill into that very well. But the important thing for you to think about is schools are changing, and for the good, because they're recognizing that it's not sit in that seat and 1,000 hours from now, we'll anoint you with knowledgehood, and now you're ready to move on. There's a representation that we need to make sure that these kids are future ready. And I'll tell you right now, no one single test evaluates that. We can test the living heck out of our kids, but we can't guarantee they're ready. We've got to make sure that they can perform as well as take the test. I'm not saying we eliminate them, but I'm saying when we put all our basis on one test, that's kind of a difficult challenge for us. So, and I know that's a little disagreement with some, but I'm okay with that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anything else for the State Board of Education?
Madam Chair, if I could,
Sure.
just a couple of clarifying points that I would ask Diana to provide to the committee.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Just a little bit of bouncing around, maybe for some additional clarity. To Senator Scott, your question about what is that number, that's correct. And I think Dr. Mathern talked about that really grain size of those standards. And as the board continues with this work alongside the Department of Ed, they are looking at, did they hit the right target? To anticipate that you would go from 1,800 plus standards to just the right number and just the right ones, the board's very realistic in recognizing that they have to follow through. They've received some feedback from some of the ed organizations, some from teachers, but they plan a targeted campaign to get into districts with those teachers in the classroom to see how those standards are bearing out for students. And also looking at that in regard to those NAEP and those ACT blueprints, right? So there's kind of that national bar too, but looking at all of those. Some teachers have come forward and said, it really didn't cut anything for me because there are those what have been termed the big rocks, and I got to take all those baby steps to get there anyway, but maybe not for every student. So that notion in your question about that number and that grain size is very critical to all working on this notion of what is the right number and which ones are the right standards for our students. And then I just wanted to touch on a little bit, Senator Rothfuss, some of your questions about the Chapter 6 and the accreditation piece. Just further clarification from what was presented to you. When schools are presented to the board as accredited with support, that does go down to those discrete aspects of the accountability model. The way the wording of the rules is right now, that it has to be 3 years, consecutive years in 3 of those discrete areas. I believe not with the board at that time, but trying to recall some of the conversations around that. I believe a lot of that had to do with school and district size in Wyoming, that going right down to a singular discrete aspect of that would create so much bounce. We're already seeing bounce, but at least that stabilizes that a little bit. Looking back, having the advantage of sitting in this seat when you were having that conversation, a quick look shows in the last couple of years, maybe 24 to 26 schools, but about 6 of them coming out of that designation. Maybe the greater concern, and going back to some of Senator Scott's question, are those districts that have been there now 6 consecutive years, right? And then that tied to that system of support discussion. I think the system of support discussion becomes really critical in Wyoming. Again, when you look at the size of schools, you look at some of the bounce in the data, but also the ability to customize that support. Right. So the customized support, say it's a multi-tiered system of support, that's really student level intervention. But when you're talking about a system-wide intervention and not everyone needing the same, then you're really taking on a load for providing meaningful support to schools and districts. So just wanted to follow up with that additional information.
Any other questions for the State Department?
Madam Chair, before you take a break.
Sure.
I did want to just acknowledge the my absolute admiration for the department. They attend every one of our meetings, every question we ask, they work through that with us. I feel like the collaboration between the state board and the department has been very, very strong. And you know, when we work on a project, it seems like we're working on it together. And I realized when the legislature set up this idea of a board and a department, there was, you know, there's confusion sometimes about who does what. But I think at least in my tenure on the board, we've kind of figured out a way to make that work. And we set the policy, we do those kind of things, and WDE helps carry it out. And it's been a great relationship. So I just wanted the committee to know that.
Thanks. Thank you very much for that information. That's good to know. Good to hear. All right, with that, I think instead of doing public participation, we'll go ahead and hold that until after our break. We're a little bit past time. I've never been one to stay on time. I'm just going to warn you ahead of time. It's 10:35, so how about a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll we'll open it up for public participation. Hopefully there'll be lots of questions for all of you. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody, from our break. It was perfect. And it's beautiful outside for those of you that went outside. Yeah, it's warmer out there than it is in here. And I think Representative Bratton and I and maybe Ms. Heitrick, we might have someone we need to contact about the heating and cooling in this room because we're freezing, a lot of us. Anyway, that's besides the point. So what we left, public comment, that we had a lot of information from the WDE and the State Board of Education. And so we're going to open it up right now for public testimony. So come on up and lots of questions that we asked. I'm sure some of you I hope some of you out there have some questions for our folks. Come on up. Please introduce yourself.
Committee. My name is Dr. Ben Kern. I'm an associate professor at the University of Wyoming. Specialize in physical education, teacher education, and would like to share a few thoughts. I've prepared a short statement or share a few thoughts with you about my ideas about physical education and its prominence within our legislative setting.
Could you maybe bring that microphone a little closer?
Sorry about that.
Sometimes some of you have soft voices. It's hard to hear. Go ahead.
I'm also speaking in partnership with some colleagues that I work with, the Wyoming Association of Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance. These are primarily physical education teachers across the state of Wyoming that make up this organization. And I really appreciate the committee's willingness to revisit the educational basket of goods and consider what students need to receive a proper, well-rounded education. The materials that we've examined this morning recognize an important principle, and that's Wyoming's definition of a proper education is not static. The educational memo notes that the baskets of goods is originated from the Campbell decision, and the court recognized the definition of a proper education necessarily will change. Memo also notes that education policy has moved from a narrow core academic subjects model to a more broader concept of a well-rounded education. I believe that matters because physical education is not an extra. It's part of a well-rounded education and directly supports the health, learning, workforce readiness, and quality of life of Wyoming students. Wyoming already includes physical education in its educational program, but inclusion alone doesn't guarantee meaningful access. Many students in Wyoming receive far less physical education than is needed to develop their physical literacy. In fact, a research study that I conducted with colleagues across the country noted that Wyoming elementary students only receive about 73 minutes per week of physical education. There are some elementary schools in Wyoming that offer 30 minutes of physical education to elementary students once every 6 school days. That's roughly or less than 30 class periods over the course of an entire school year. It's less than 15 hours of physical education instruction time. Think about that in terms of how much can actually be taught in that amount of time. Also from this study, we've noted that from 2005 to 2021, the number of minutes per week of middle school physical education went from 221 minutes per week down to 161 minutes per week in 2021, a significant reduction, and that's been seen across the country as well. Part of this reduction in content areas like physical education, art, and music is a response to the added accountability that comes with the state testing mechanisms, the accountability associated with those. So when we're speaking of physical education, it's not just a matter of being active or getting exercise. High quality physical education supports students' attention, their behavior, academic achievement, mental health, their confidence, teamwork, belonging. It teaches students the movement skills that they need to participate safely and confidently in things like recess at school, athletics, outdoor recreation, their work, and lifelong physical activity. And when students lose these opportunities to move, be creative, succeed beyond just test scores, and experience joy in school, the day becomes less balanced and less engaging. Physical education is especially relevant in Wyoming. Our state's identity and economy are tied to physical capability, outdoor living, resilient communities. PE helps prepare students with the strength, balance, endurance, coordination, and confidence needed for life and work in Wyoming. It also belongs in this conversation because Wyoming faces some serious mental health challenges. We have one of the highest suicide rates among any state in the nation. And while physical education is not a cure for the multifaceted issues that are associated with that, physical activity is one evidence-informed way to reduce stress, anxiety, and depression. And for many children, school-based PE is the only structured physical activity they get through the entire week. Importantly, a request for focusing more on physical education is not disconnected from school level realities. Wyoming principals already recognize the value of physical education. In another study that my lab and I conducted a couple of years ago, a statewide survey of almost 300 principals in the state of Wyoming, of which 145 responded. Nearly 95% that said that their school's PE curriculum is specifically designed to meet Wyoming PE standards. That same survey found that just over 42% of Wyoming schools could increase physical education time if the state required it. That tells us that school leaders value physical education, and many schools already have the capacity to act if the legislature required it. This is also a conversation or a time to recognize that it's important to address this common concern that setting a minimum time requirement for physical education could come at the expense of academic achievement. That seems to be the big concern. And to set your mind at ease on that, research over the past 3 decades has consistently shown that when physical education time is reinstated into the school day, even when it reduces instructional time for those tested subjects, academic achievement does not go down. In many cases, it increases. So there's relatively little academic risk in considering minimum PE time requirements, and a great deal to gain in student health, well-being, engagement, and readiness to learn. For these reasons, I respectfully urge the committee to consider strengthening physical education within the basket of goods through clear statutory expectations. And specifically, Wyoming should consider establishing minimum weekly PE time requirements, prohibiting the withholding of physical education as a punishment or for academic makeup, requiring meaningful physical education credit for graduation, while limiting the substitutions for non-PE activities. We're thinking things like ROTC, sports, marching band at times gets substituted for physical education credit. And think about the ramifications of that. We wouldn't necessarily give an English credit for participating in speech and debate, now would we? And we'd also consider physical education and wellness indicators in ways that elevate student health without creating any kind of new testing burdens. We're not talking about an ask here about that. I think we've already had enough conversation about the extent to which we are testing our students, and we don't see that as a value with physical education, but we do see increasing students' access to this important content area as something that's very important. So final thing to say here, the purpose of the basket of goods is to define the education that Wyoming owes its children. If that education is meant to prepare students for responsible citizenship, productive employment, lifelong learning, and life in Wyoming, then physical education deserves stronger protection. PE helps students learn better, feel better, work better, and live better. Thank you for your time, and I'll take some questions if you would like to ask. Thank you.
Questions for Dr. Kern? Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a very quick question. You brought up something about using the discipline tactic of removing a child from physical activity quite often as a discipline for maybe moving around too much in class. Is this a widespread tactic? Is this really a problem?
Dr. Kern?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Kelly, yes, it is. And our research that has spanned all 51 states, that includes DC as the 51st. In each one of these states, we see that schools report withholding things like recess from kids probably more prominently than physical education, but it does happen roughly across schools nationwide. About 15 to 20% of schools do withhold physical education and academic content area from students as a punishment. So it is a widespread problem. Yes.
Other questions? I have one, just Dr. Kern. Oh, you had one? Go ahead. No, I'd rather have you go ahead. Go ahead, Senator Brennan.
Okay, first of all, thank you for being here and presenting. I liked a lot of what you had to say, and if I didn't catch some of this, I apologize. In some of your stuff, or do you have any of the research with, I know we can look at like the well-being and that they're ready to, like kids are more ready to learn, but does it go into some of the research as what some of the PE activities do as far as just even helping with brain development, those pathways that go from right to left and those types of things? Do you have some scientific information in that direction?
Dr. Kern?
Madam Chair, Senator Brennan. Yes, not research specifically from my lab, but there is a pretty robust body of research that's being done on the connection between physical activity and neurocognitive performance. So specifically, brain volume and brain function are enhanced by both, acute bouts of physical activity, meaning those that immediately following some bout of activity, but the long-term exposure to physical activity is shown to improve cognitive function among kids, and that cognitive function has been associated with improved academic achievement, specifically on state standardized tests.
Other questions? Yeah, the question I had, Dr. Kern, and Dr. Kern reached out to me, and I just thought it was really a valuable thing since we're talking about the basket of goods to take a look at this, because I had two of my grandkids that live in Wyoming that are both still in elementary, had mentioned this more than once, that they were losing PE time, and that's one of their favorite things to go to. And I would say why, and they go, well, there's this or there's that, or there's an assembly, or there's a different program or whatever. And it seems like it's quite often it's PE and music and art, really important things that kind of get taken out. Do you kind of wonder sometimes? I mean, you talk about, I've seen some studies way back when about just the analogy between, the kids getting out and doing some workouts before they take their tests. And they've done some studies. I know I don't remember how many years ago that I looked at this. And I kind of wonder about our NAEP scores, going down nationwide. Do you think that since it's nationwide, we're taking PE time, that maybe there's a correlation there?
Madam Chair, thanks for the question. Yeah, if there is a relationship at this point, it would be hard to pin down because of the data that would need to be collected. But in my personal opinion, I do think there's a relationship there. And as I've been exposed to the literature for the past 15, 20 years, there has been a considerable erosion in physical education time, and that also includes art and music and other subjects as well. Over this period of time that we have, since about the early 2000s, we have really begun to put this heavy emphasis on the standardized tests, and not just the emphasis on the testing, but the accountability that comes with it. And the knee-jerk reaction among schools nationwide has been to, constrict all of those other subjects and focus more on reading, writing, and arithmetic. And it's not to say that those subjects are not important, but I urge the committee to think in this last 20 years, when that has been our approach in education, are we better off? And perhaps we've made gains in reading, writing, arithmetic, STEM, these subjects that are tested. Perhaps we've made some of that improvement, but at what cost have we made that improvement, right? And so, our students are less healthy, less fit. They suffer chronic disease at earlier ages now than they used to. And that's, is there a direct causation to physical education time? Not necessarily, but what we are looking at is a youth group that is not as physically active and capable as they once were. And we've taken away one of the key parts of that educational experience and that developmental experience by reducing physical education time in schools.
Any other questions for Dr. Kern? Yes, go ahead, Representative Guggemos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just put forward that this just doesn't apply to kids. I can speak firsthand since I was elected. The past 2 years, having to sit all day through meetings, session, committee meetings. You can't see it, but my legs are bouncing up and down like crazy, and I just want to get up and do something. So I think it pertains to adults as well as kids. Another comment would be, it seems like our education has gotten so complex with all the testing and the scoring and all the requirements put on it. And it's like the more complex we make it, the worse we do. Our schooling system was a lot simpler back in the day, and it allowed us to become a world power in 200 years. And now look at us, we've made it so complex, it's not working. So I think keeping it simple is the key. Thank you.
Anything else you'd like to say, Dr. Kern, or finish up with?
Madam Chair,
I think, I think he asked a question in there.
thank you for the comment. Yeah, I think I'll second your notion here that my legs constantly can't stop moving either. And I would say that if you think about a typical school day, we ask children to sit and focus and sit and sit and sit a lot longer than we would expect for ourselves. And this, these 2-day meetings are a bit of a marathon for all of us to sit for this amount of time. And this mirrors a typical school day for a child. I mean, ask yourself if that's the best that we can do. I think we can do better. And I think I think that reading and writing are important, but I also think that our students need to have something to read and write about. They need to have other experiences at school. And if we are serious about a well-rounded education, that should include physical education, physical activity, and not just a singular focus on core subjects. I'll end with that.
Senator Scott, I think, has a question also. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, my question is how much of what we're seeing in this respect is really school related, and how much of it is social, in that kids are paying so much attention to electronics, so much time on the cell phone, so much time and that sort of thing, when rather than getting outside and actually doing something. And are we not just seeing an after-school problem rather than a school problem? That society has moved toward too much emphasis on social media and electronics rather than getting out and doing something after school.
Dr. Kern?
Yeah, Madam Chair and Senator Scott, I'd love to respond to that. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that, that the technology revolution that we've seen in the last, 10 to 15 years has certainly impacted our children's physical activity levels. And I would like to offer that physical education itself is not simply getting them physically active and just moving, but physical education crosses a psychomotor, a cognitive, and an affective domain. So we teach children how to become lifelong movers, where to move outside of school. And ultimately, it is about getting them to recognize, be competent in, and enjoy being physically active away from school time. And that in physical education does not typically include using technology or using a screen. So I think it is sort of on board with an idea that we need to curb screen time, we need to curb technology use time, and we need to reshape habits of young people outside of school. And if you think about from a societal standpoint as well, we've been so clever in engineering our lives where we don't have to do anything physical, right? We need to re-engineer the physical back into our lives, and that needs to start in school. And we need to teach our children how to do that.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for your testimony, Dr. Kern. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very good information.
Sure.
All right, who's next? Please introduce yourself. Tell us what you'd like us to know.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah. I'm a resident here in Casper. So I'm going to go back a little ways in your agenda. The Wyoming Department of Ed memo that they had, the court case out of Campbell County from 1995 the ruling specifically states that the definition is in the legislature's hands to define it. It's yours to define the aspects of what a good education or a well-rounded or however you want to say it. That's your realm. And it is not static. It doesn't move around. It doesn't need to be, we did it this year and now we have to change something the next year. It can be defined. It just depends on how you want to define it. One of the other things that I wanted, there was a lot of conversation this morning about performance and performance standards. There is a report of 3-year rolling school performance from the Department of Ed. This is not meeting schools for every district in the state of Wyoming. It's not 26 schools. And this is for all 3 years. Okay, this isn't just a few. This isn't just a small amount. This is a large amount. And this is public, like you can find it. I can give you the link if you don't know that this is a report. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is it is the accountability of the standardized tests. That is how our accountability system is built. We have to have a way to say that taxpayers are getting a return on investment. What are we spending billions and billions of dollars on? How do we see that? Well, we see it in our elementary school kids when they do math, when they read, when they struggle. We see it in the workforce when they graduate and they can't tell time and they can't do math and they can't read well. That's how we are seeing it. That's how we're interpreting it. Not everybody looks at these reports. They're not all like us. They're not all in all of this stuff all the time. I think it's important that we have some level of accountability. It is good to have graduation standards that open it and say, yes, you can get an English credit for being in speech and debate. Yes, you can get a PE credit for being in sports. I think that is fluid, that is easy, but is easy what we want for our kids? Where are our academics versus our experiences? Have our schools just become about experiences? Are they just checking the boxes for, yep, we hit that standard this week, but it's not mastered? Are we all skill-based and not mastery-based anymore? I think one of the common things in everybody's testimony today before this point has been that they want your guidance. They want your leadership in defining what is needed for the basket of goods. The estimate that I got from the State Board of Education was 65% reduction in standards. I think the question that we need to ask is, how did we get there? How did we get to 2,000 standards? How did that happen? And what is changing to keep it from happening again? How long did we teach kids 65% of information we all of a sudden decided wasn't necessary, wasn't pertinent? Where's the value in the education that that chunk of kids got versus the chunk of kids that are going to get something different now? I think that's amazing work. I was excited to see the work that they did here in the meetings, the different things that they were talking about with the reductions. Where's our viable content? They made a lot of room. 65% reduction, 1,000, 2,000 to 1,000. That's a lot of room. What are we going to fill it with? What are we going to say is important for education? They arbitrarily, accidentally figured out these standards were more important than these standards. So how about you guide them and say, this is what we want in English. This is what we want in early education. This is what we want in high school, in science, in social studies, in government, and financial literacy. Define it, write it out specifically. strengthening the statute 21-9-101, specific bodies of academic content and logical grade band progression, spiraling academics so that you don't just visit it once in kindergarten and never see it again in your academic career. That foundational knowledge is important consistently throughout academics. Vague standards, obviously, we've lived that. It doesn't do any good. Reducing standard overload, aligning graduation requirements. Like I said, the graduation requirements, Natrona County just recently did that and passed that policy. It's still inconsistent. What Natrona County does for a graduate, we require 26.5 credits. 10.5 of those credits are electives. How good are those electives? Is the football player just taking PE credits to get to his 26.5, or is he taking an extra English class? What's in 10.5 extra credits from what the state requires? Why is it beneficial? I think that it's important for you guys to hone in the basket and say, this is what we want across the board to produce what is necessary. And I think when we do that and define it, you're going to see a huge change in testing. Kids are going to be able to do that fluid application from one subject to another. It's not going to be a teach to the test. It's going to be a teach to mastery and apply across the board. ACT won't seem crazy. There was a recent articles that recently came out about how a very influential bigger college is now reinstating SAT and ACT after 8 years of not having it. For a reason. It sets a standard of accountability that yes, you're ready. Yes, you can accomplish and move this from topic to topic and be successful in college. They are important. Standardized tests are hard. I don't want to over test our kids. 6 hours of testing is a lot for a little kid, third graders. Yeah, that's a lot for their little brains. And yeah, PE across the board. Mental health, you look at health assessments. I'm from the medical field professionally, so any growth and development, they have to move. They have to cognitively step in those directions to walk, to run, to play, to do all of those things. And that's why early education all started to focus on play as the first thing for education. And there's a reason for all of that. So yeah, incorporating more physical activity would be good. That's all I have. Stand for questions.
Questions? I didn't catch your last name, but I said Sarah Beaver. Any questions for her? Yes, Senator Scott.
We've been trying as a legislature to define what we're looking for in terms of performance. In 2001, when we first passed that, what's now the reading section in our statutes, we defined it, what we're looking for is reading at grade level, particularly in grade 3, the primary grades. And we're having trouble translating what that, we know it when we see it sort of thing, Madam Chairman, but we've got to define it more precisely, perhaps, so we can measure against it. Because if you can't measure it, you can't manage for it. So we do have to measure. And how do we define better than just reading at grade level? We don't seem to have succeeded somehow. What are we missing?
Ms. Beaver?
Because you know, we're not trying to make bureaucratic requirements here. We're trying to get something that the kids can perform to. And we know that reading is hard, Madam Chairman. We know that. How do we find some measure that we can use?
Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Senator Scott. Do I have an answer on how to fix all of it? No, I don't. To me, reading is a science, but in the 1900s, we had an 80 to 90% reading across the board, no matter what. And our primary source was the Bible, and that's not necessarily an easy text. What do we need to do? We need to define the aspects that we as Wyoming, you as legislators, truly believe are the things that produce a successful reader. Phonics, Mississippi went from the bottom part of NAEP to almost the top portion. And they instituted phonics. Mastery, not an exposure to, not a, we're going to take 2 weeks on this subject and that subject, and we're going to sight read and we're going to memorize these words and we're going to just know these ones. Mastery is key. Skill-based education will fail. That to me is why you see the fourth grade and eighth grade drops. You don't have mastery by fourth grade, your primary grades. By the time they're in eighth grade, they do not have that foundational mastery to be able to apply across all other grades to build content knowledge that allows for critical thinking. If they don't have academic content knowledge, they can't critically think because they don't know what questions to ask. It isn't that our curriculum isn't strong enough or that districts haven't picked the right curriculum or the right things or done this thing. It is getting back to basics, getting back to those foundational models that we know actually produce successful, strong readers and kids that are doing math across the board in all of our academics. Science, we reverted back to STEM. STEM has produced really strong results and increase in science. Those kinds of, it has to be, science is a hands-on. You have to understand the concepts of science to move through science, to get to a point where you're at the higher sciences.
Yes.
Senator, go ahead.
Madam Chairman, what I'm grappling with is, yes, there's various different systems for teaching reading. Phonics is perhaps the one that works the best for the most people. But it seems to me that as I've looked at the districts that seem to be doing the best in the state, the thing that comes across to me is that there's an emphasis in those districts on the individual kid and figuring out why each individual kid that's struggling, and probably half of them do struggle. And this is something that I understand is just universal across the whole world. It's not just us. It's everybody has trouble teaching everybody how to read, how to do some of these academic things. Is it the system that we've got, or do we need to pay more attention to the problems that individual children have and say, not why is the whole system not working, but why is it not, what's not working for that child, and fix that child and go on to the next one. Madam Chairman, I may be having trouble being articulate here, but it does seem to me if we paid more attention to individual children and their difficulties, that may be the piece in the system that's missing.
Senator, good questions. Any chance that you can, I mean, those are some tough questions.
Madam Chair.
Take a stab at it if you'd like.
Yeah, has the system lost the purpose of why we have the system, the child? Yes, that's why you're seeing decreased enrollment across the nation, not just our state. Are parents re-individualizing their child outside of a system? Yes. Does the system work for a large portion of it? Could it be more versatile instead of cookie cutter, this is the box that you have to fit into? Absolutely, 100% it could. Do we have MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, to bring children up when they're identified as having a problem specifically with reading or other academics? Yes, we have those. We've had those for 20 years. Show me the efficacy. Show me where it helps. Show me where it works. We've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars on education for a system that we can't get our kids through without about a 50-50 chance. We've lost sight of the students, in my opinion, to me. We have lost sight of the students in a lot of the system. And getting back to the student, getting back to what is it that they need? Where is their brain cognitively? Not just broad ranges of pedagogy and broad theories of how to teach, but getting back to how do they actually learn? How do they actually develop that education? Those things are important for us to be successful in the future, no matter what, no matter computer sciences, AI, any of those kinds of things. We can adapt to those when we have strong learners that can apply across a multitude of things.
Senator?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, it seems to me as this committee has talked to some of our districts that have been the most successful, that a common theme in all of that has been when they have a child that is having difficulty in the primary grades, that they try to pay attention to why is that child not learning and what do we have to do to fix it. That was certainly a theme. Perhaps the Sheridan district was the most articulate in it, but they all seem to have this theme. And I had the experience, Madam Chairman, of going up last winter to Buffalo and listening to what Johnson County was doing with their new system. And it seemed to me that a particular piece of it was they were continually, testing is the wrong word because that's much more formal, but they're continually asking, why is child not reaching particular benchmarks, and trying to say, if they didn't, what are we going to do about it right now? And that seemed to be how they were having success. Is that where we're lacking somehow? Am I missing something here? Because it does seem to me that in a lot of our districts, we don't pay that kind of attention to the individual children.
We're putting an awful lot on you. Go ahead, take one more stab and then we'll move on to the next person. Thanks.
Madam Chair, Senator Scott. Consistent evaluation of subjective and objective information in the classroom and outside of the classroom is important, because we've talked about that a few different times. We've touched on it. Home life, physical activity, diet, all of those things play. If a child's socks are wrong and the seam is rubbing on the top of their toe, that affects everything for that kiddo. So yes, taking into account different factors, but having a realistic perspective that schools are not made to address every social aspect of life. Yes, evaluation on an ongoing basis, that doesn't necessarily mean testing, but observing a child fluidly reading a book, you said it, you know it when you see it. Does that mean that that child isn't going to struggle with more advanced or harder challenging books? No, not necessarily. But for right now, they're doing within this scope on these readers, they are reading how they should and fluidly reading. Testing is a little different. You have to be able to apply, especially with the YTOP and how our standards are applied. So it's, yes, evaluation is necessary, goes hand in hand with testing, unfortunately.
Thank you, Ms. Bieber, for your.
Sorry, Madam.
Oh,
Chair,
I'm sorry.
Can I jump in?
You were done. Go ahead.
Thank you. A burning question here, because there's something I'm really struggling with. I agree with the assessment of what we're looking at in the schools, the overregulation. Here's where I'm struggling. We look at Mississippi and they mandated the science of reading and it worked. They hit a bullseye. But I think, what if they missed and they put in the legislation a system that was a complete failure? and then would have to go through the entire legislature again, and how many kids would fall through the cracks in the meantime. So I'm wondering who is best suited to make these decisions of defining education. Is it a part-time legislative committee, two of us which will not be on this committee next year, won't even be in the legislature? Many of us who are not educational experts. So I'm wondering, how do we form a system where we're meeting the kids where they need to be met that isn't dependent on a part-time legislature telling educational professionals how to do their jobs? How do you envision a statewide system that lets educators lead and refrains from micromanaging from the legislature down to the districts, to our educational professionals, how they should be teaching?
Ms.
Madam
Bieber,
Chair,
another tough question.
Representative Kelly,
You're getting all the hard ones.
like I said, I don't have the answers for how to fix it. If I had the answers for how to fix it, I
Be
would be
rich.
running for a whole lot of different offices. I will say, you are charged with it. It doesn't matter whether it's appropriate or it's where the right lane or that it should be. You are the ones that are responsible for it. The court decided, the court told you, they've said it numerous times, there's going to be more lawsuits. You're going to get sued by who knows what entity over education. You have to decide. You have to give leadership and you have to be willing to give that direction. Otherwise, we'll continue to flounder. We're going to get back to 2,500 standards or more. We're going to get back to decreasing in NAEP. Why top scores slipping? All of those things are going to continue to happen unless you change something. And being willing to put in definition, and I'm not talking about prescribing programs or structuring in curriculums. You can say phonics. They can say, okay, phonics is from this program is appropriate for this group of students at the district or the teacher or the school level. That allows them the openness to be able to do that. Whatever the prerogative of this committee, of the legislature is to define that, it is your wheelhouse to define it.
Did you have follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
And I understand that, and you're correct with that too. It's constitutionally, and the courts have said that the legislature is to do this. And I too don't have answers, which is why we're having this discussion. How do you feel about this proposal? Because the basket of goods changes. It's meant to change. These things are meant to be flexible as times change. That the legislature were to imbue the Wyoming Department of Education, the educational professionals working within the state, to address these definitions as possible, rather than have a part-time legislature that only meets once per year have to come back and revisit this midstream. Does that sound more practical, having the legislature giving that authority to the department?
Ms. Bieber?
Madam Chair, Representative Kelly, realigning the elected state superintendent's authority over the Wyoming Department of Ed to house public education and to have that authority to do that is the proper role of that position as an elected position. Taking on the accountability to an individual position instead of a board or fractured amongst other entities, yes, it would be more concise. It would allow responsibility to land appropriately, and for parents and schools and districts to have somewhere to go that wasn't just the legislature, depending on what it looked like. Can I say arbitrarily, yes, I would support that? No, I can't.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Let's move on to the next person. And then if there's others that are going to testify, come on up. We'll fill the chairs up. We got about 20 minutes between us and lunch, and we want to hear from as many folks as want to talk. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name's Mary Schmidt. I'm from Casper. I'm going to kind of jump around because there's a lot of things that you guys have heard and talked about this morning, and I just want to cover some of them. One dominant theme of this morning's testimony from different departments in education is the lack of putting the child first. The child is not the focus of the State Board of Education or the Department of Education. It is the focus of them to make sure that they're carrying out assessments that you guys want, that they're writing standards based off of the basket of goods. The focus is not the child. And that, to me, is one of the main problems with our entire education system. These are children that need to learn information in order to become functioning adults. They're not to become functioning workers, but to be functioning adults. If we do that, then they will determine what training they want and what type of occupation in life they want. That is the difference that I think we need to change and shift our focus. Part of it is, and this is where I'm going to start jumping around, as far as the basket of goods, which Representative Kelly, you don't particularly like the idea of you guys defining it, but it is your statutory requirement. We need to get back to the way children learn. There's 3 stages to it. There's rhetoric, there's grammar, there's logic, and there's rhetoric. The grammar stage is the consumption of information, where we need to teach them phonics. As you said, Senator Scott, that we have children that struggle with different disabilities. It doesn't stop the fact that they need to understand phonics. Phonics explains how letters blend, how words are created. They need to understand that. And there are ways to teach a child that's having a learning difficulty phonics with that. And that is where the schools have to look for those programs. But we still have to teach them phonics. And we have to teach them spelling. Spelling and phonics go together. We do not teach spelling in our schools. We need to. The 3rd grade YTOP assessment teaches our children how to use spell check. That's part of the tools of YTOP. We teach them how to use spell check. That's not a good quality because you will not learn how to read if you don't understand the spelling concepts and definitions of words and how to use it. I mean, just use the word there. Are we teaching them the different definitions and the different spellings? No. The other part of that is from our 3rd to our NAEP's case, 4th to 8th grade, we stop. What we teach up to 4th grade, we don't keep teaching and keep reintroducing. That's a problem. That's why we have the drop-off. So if you use these stages of development, the grammar stage, where it's a lot of memorization, it's a lot of introduction of information, that sometimes you may be thinking, why do they need to this at this age? Because it's planting a seed that when they get to the logic stage, which is where they start to question a little bit, then you can start pulling that information and you can start teaching them with literary analysis, formal grammar and composition. You can start with the understanding of what you're reading and the concepts. That pulls from all of that information that you've given them in that grammar stage. Then you get to the rhetoric stage, which is 9th through 12th grade. They've got the information, they've learned it repetitively, and now they can start becoming critical thinkers because they actually have a bunch of information that they can critically analyze and think about. And that's where those advanced comprehension, compositions, works of literature, historical analysis, that's where that stage comes through. If you don't develop your basket of goods in that level, in that outline, then we're missing the boat as we have been. That is the way it was done years and years and years ago. And we have gotten away from it because there's a trend here or there's a trend there. But the fundamentals of those stages are how children learn and are the best way to teach. Now, as far as standards and the basket of goods, it is up to you to determine, and they need to be narrowly focused. We have 10 content areas, and it's history. History is a very broad subject. How do you want history? What grades need to have history? You need to clearly define it. And you need to clearly define your kindergarten through 2nd grade, 3rd grade by their developmental skills. They need only reading, phonics, spelling, grammar, and math. They don't need a history standard. I'm sorry to say they don't need a PE standard. They don't need a performing arts. They don't need a CTE. They don't need anything else. And so there shouldn't even be the job of writing a standard. We are currently, our 10 content standards go from kindergarten to 12th grade. That's a huge amount of time, cost, and expense, and totally unnecessary. The State Board of Education, if you're going to keep it in that category, should only be writing a standard for English language arts and define what English language arts means, and math for that age bracket. That's it. No other standards. If a school wants to add more, fine. But that is what they should be tested on. That is what the standard should be written. That would eliminate a lot of the standards that are out there right now if you just did it by grade band. Not you, but whoever writes the standards. And there are a lot of organizations and big education think tanks that can help you write those standards, that can do it, that you can research. That's what Mississippi and the other school districts or states have done. They have brought in experts on the science of reading to help write those standards. They're education experts. But you need to define it so that they know what standards they're writing. And that's the very important part. You also have to understand your testing. NAEP assesses reading. YTOP does not assess reading. Two different categories. They don't do that. Prior to YTOP, when we used PAWS, Wyoming school districts were performing in the 80 percentile, 85 percentile. When we switched to YTOP, we dropped to the 50 percentile. What's going on? What's with the test? The other component is ACT tests. Why are we testing every single junior? It's a college assessment test. If a kid's not going to college, why do we test them? It should be a voluntary test that if you want, you can take. If you don't, you shouldn't. We shouldn't be wasting the cost, the time, or the effort. It's just pointless, and it's making our numbers sink because there are kids taking it that have no desire whatsoever to take this test. So what is it telling us? Nothing. It's really not giving us what we want. So these are the things. I think our testing, our assessments have to be pointed. A teacher can't be held accountable for all these standards as much as they should be held accountable if they're growing that child's knowledge. And I know this may not be particularly fond of in the teacher world, but a growth assessment is truly the best way to assess learning. If you test the child, every single child at the beginning of the school year, and then that teacher teaches them through the school year, at the end of the school year, you should be able to grow that every individual child's knowledge base. And you do another growth assessment. Every child has a starting point and an ending point. If it didn't improve, well, then something went wrong in that school year. Because no matter what is going on in a child's life, the teacher should be able to grow that child's base in the course of a school year. If not, something is not right. So those are the two things that you have to marry. You have to get those things to work together in order to make this an improvement. As far as graduation goes, yes, we'd go by the federal graduation. But do you understand what the federal graduation rate means? It means only that we kept a kid from freshman year to 12th grade to senior year, and they got a D or better. That's all the federal graduation rate means. That is a pointless statistic. I don't even know why we report it other than, fine, give it to the feds and let them go about it, but it's meaningless to us. So honestly, if you truly believe that not every child's meant for college and some kids are meant for CTE, then develop your high school program that way. Make the first 2 years, when kids don't have driver's license usually, they're not as mobile, make them take the core knowledge of high school, their maths, their readings, or their English, their histories, their science. Get it done in the first 2 years. When they now become of an age where they can drop out at 17, or they're starting to think of their future, they now have 3 options. They can leave, because a kid who doesn't want to be in school is disruptive and is counterproductive to the system. So let them go. They have the core knowledge, let them go get a job. If a child wants a CTE degree, then let them go and totally focus on that. And if a child wants to go to college, then keep them on the college course. Give them the 3 options. They're not here to be held captive until they're 18. So those are the things that we need to really look at revolutionizing how we educate. We don't need to have them there all 4 years if they don't want to be there. And we need to make their time there worth their time. So go and get a CTE thing after you're 17 or 16, 17, 18, depending. Those are the focuses that we really need to do. And I think you guys can start that process as a legislative who writes the standards and who writes that into law, and then allow these departments, although I am definitely supportive of consolidating it, mainly because what accountability do the parents have? The superintendent of public instruction has very little control over education. We already heard about how the lack of teeth in the accreditation process. So why do we not give that accountability back to parents through the superintendent of public instruction, who is an elected official, to control these? Why are we separating it? The State Board of Education and the Department of Education work hand in hand already. So why do we have a board? Why are we compensating a board? They don't do the work. So I'm asking that you consolidate these so that, one, the Department of the State Superintendent can be held accountable through an election, and that you now have consolidation and working, streamlining it. You've got plenty of room in that office to put all of it in there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Any questions? I think we have about 9 minutes until dinner, or excuse me, lunch. Dinner, not dinner yet, but are there questions for Mrs. Schmidt? Some good information? Senator Scott?
There's so much I'm trying to unpack here, but one thing that you talked about earlier, should we pass a law forbidding the State Board of Education from setting additional standards, particularly in the younger grades, and say you could set standards only for math and reading, and say writing coming in at third grade or something like that?
I don't think you need a law. It's your statutory responsibility to outline the basket of goods. So if you say that kindergarten, if you do it by grade bands, well, that prevents them from writing a standard outside of that grade band for that level. So if you're saying ELA for K through third is going to encompass phonics, spelling, handwriting, grammar, that's it, and then math. That's it. That's all the standards we want. So you don't, it's within your statutory, you just have to rewrite that part of the statute. And then they would have to take what you've outlined by grade band, by subject, and then they would write the standards based off of that. Right now, they take the history and they write it for kindergarten through 12th grade. And what do you mean by history? Do we want them to learn all about the Greeks? Or do we want them to know our system of government? That's the question. Do fourth graders need to learn Greek? Some may want, some may not, but you need to define it, and you need to define how it needs to be laid out so that it's a systematic approach to education that mirrors their development. And that can be done. It's not over difficult to do as a legislature. I think you guys can do this. And then what you do with the departments is a whole separate thing, but that's how it would go from there.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead, Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to clarify, when you're talking about the legislature to do its job, to lay out some clear guidelines, some clear parameters, this is the arena in which you will operate, and then allow the educational professionals to write the specifics and work within those parameters.
Yes, and I'll give you an example. And my example is the K through 6 grammar stage. I would say that you needed a systematic, explicit instruction that builds a strong foundational body of knowledge through phonics, spelling, handwriting, grammar, fluency, decoding, listening comprehension, narration, memorization, and broad exposure to classic stories, fairy tales, fables, poetry, historical speeches. Standards shall emphasize the acquisition of substantial content knowledge as the essential foundation for later critical thinking and expression. That is how you could define it. One other quick thing that I did forget that I think is very important. Currently, the state determines you have to be in school a certain amount of days. That is a pointless statute. I think what you need to say is that you need to require the schools to teach a certain amount of weeks of curriculum. That's ensuring that they get the knowledge. The days is irrelevant. It's how much knowledge have they taught, how much have they done in order to get the children to know what they need to know. The days some districts do it a lot less, and some want to be doing it a lot less because whatever their district societies, their social realm wants to do. And so we shouldn't be so 185 days. What does 185 days mean? The last 2 days of my kids' high school was watching videos because they turned in their computers.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schmidt. And just remember, public, when you come up, that have your questions come through the chair, please. Thank you, though. Appreciate it. Go ahead. Who's next? Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Jennifer Hopkins, and I'm speaking here on behalf of myself. I have something really short, so if you're waiting for something longer, I apologize. So I just picked up on this to integrate the AI use as part of the whole child and the standards. I'm just asking that we do not do that. And AI, it's new, it's so many things, and I don't want to see that a part of our younger kids' education. There's a lot to learn before they would even have to use anything like that. In the high school levels, I would suggest to use that maybe in a junior or senior year and that be a part of a computer class that they chose to take. And the reason why I am asking for that is because right now our students are being, some of our high school students are being just asked to use AI and just put words into a, gosh, I probably shouldn't even say the name. So you know what I mean? Like you just use one of those systems and they just put in whatever and they get back whatever. And I would like to just, for lack of a better word, basics. What I mean by that, kids should get their information from reading their books and should be, it should be only their books where they're pulling that information instead of just a wide variety of whatever is out there in AI. And a lot of it is inaccurate, excuse me. So when you're looking into that, I would just suggest that, we not use it, and it should be taken seriously and not lightly that we're moving into this kind of world, and that, so we just keep to the basics of it. So, gosh, I want to touch into some of those other things that the speakers were talking about, but one speaker, he was talking about physical activities for the younger age. I really do agree with that, and I do know in our district that kids are being held from physical activity for punishment, and that is important. But that's all I got. I stand for questions if you have any.
Thank you, Ms. Hopkins. Questions for her? Yeah, we're going to talk about AI more tomorrow, but I appreciate you taking the time, and we don't want to hurry you so that, I mean, we can take a longer lunch or a shorter lunch. So if you have other things, we're more than happy to hear your questions. Is there anything else that you didn't get a chance to talk about that you wanted to?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So, I grew up in Arizona, and I want to touch on this reading a little bit. And when I was in grade school, they had systems already in place to catch children with dyslexia and learning disabilities. My hard time I'm having with all of this is, why is this seem so new now? And my upbringing, it was very phonics based. I would suggest for all of this is that we slow down. Kids are being moved too quickly through the system, and they can't learn all of that quick enough. So sometimes students are learning maybe in their second half of school, in their third grade year, it finally clicks. But if we're moving too quickly, they're not going to catch what they need. Sometimes you just have to go back, back to the beginning and start all over. That doesn't mean they just need more time. It doesn't mean we got to switch to a new curriculum and introduce. And I'm going to make an example here. I've seen this with some homeschool parents. They don't think their kids are learning quick enough from a certain curriculum, so they're switching to a new curriculum. And I happen to homeschool my kids, not all of them. But I was told by a teacher a very long time ago that when I started, that you don't switch up curriculums because you're going to create holes in their education. You just turn back the page and then you start over. And so what I think what's going on, and it's possibly what could be going on, is that we're just trying to get these results quicker. And it's not going to happen because our kids learn at all different paces. And so I think that could be a part of the problem that, Madam Chair, that what Senator Scott is asking is that what is it that we can do? Well, I think a lot of those answers are already out there. And I think one of them is that we just need to slow down.
Thank you for that testimony, Ms. Hopkins. Anybody have a question? Okay, thank you so much. Is there anybody else in the room that would like to testify on this morning's topics? Going. I guess you all are hungry too. With that, we'll go ahead and close public testimony. And rather than do directives, as I said before, we're going to do those at the end of the day tomorrow. So I guess we're pretty close. 12:01. I mean, this might be the best I've ever done. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to pat myself on the back. I don't often do that, but because I'm usually not ever on time for anything. But let's go ahead and take, unless the committee has something else that they need to add, a break. Okay, we'll see you back here at 1:30. We have a whole lot more exciting things to talk about. Thank you.